A locked window cracked open on the coldest night of the year. A stranger running through the snow like something worse than winter was chasing him. And an 11-year-old girl standing in the doorway of a biker clubhouse, holding a crumpled napkin that could destroy everything these men had built, or save it. But here's what nobody expected. The most dangerous people in that room weren't the ones coming to take it all away. They were the ones sitting quietly in the dark, engines still ticking, scars older than their silence, waiting for one reason, just one reason, to stand up. And when they did, nothing in that town would ever be the same. If this story hits you, drop a like right now, comment the city you're watching from, and stay all the way to the end. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The first thing Mara Quinn learned about the world was that nobody comes when you scream. She learned it at 6, curled behind the water heater in her mother's apartment on Ridgefield Street, listening to the sound of a man she didn't know breaking dishes against the kitchen wall. She learned it again at 8, sitting in a guidance counselor's office that smelled like carpet cleaner and stale candy, watching a woman with tired eyes write notes on a yellow legal pad without once looking up. And she learned it a third time at 9, standing outside a courthouse while her mother's boyfriend walked free and her mother walked away from her without turning around. By 11, Mara had stopped screaming altogether. She lived now with her aunt, a woman named Pauline, who worked double shifts at the county hospital and left frozen dinners on the counter with post-it notes that said things like, "Back by midnight," and "Lock the deadbolt." Pauline was not cruel. She was simply absent in the way that exhausted people become absent, her body arriving home at 1 a.m. smelling like antiseptic, her eyes already closed before she reached the bedroom door. She signed permission slips. She bought school supplies. She never asked how Mara's day was because she never had the energy to hear the answer. So Mara made her own world. And the center of that world, the axis around which everything else turned, was a place no social worker or school administrator would have approved of. Iron Haven Motorcycle Club sat at the dead end of Weller Avenue, 3 blocks from the railroad tracks, in a building that used to be a machine shop before the factory closed in 1987. The walls were cinder block painted black. The windows were narrow and barred. A row of Harleys lined the front like sleeping animals, chrome catching whatever light the afternoon offered, and above the steel door hung a hand-welded sign that read, Iron Haven MC, EST. 1979 in letters that had been repainted so many times they looked like they were growing out of the metal. From the outside, it looked like trouble. From the inside, and Mara knew the inside better than almost anyone, it was the only room in the world where she could breathe. She had found the place by accident 2 years earlier, cutting through the alley behind Weller Avenue to avoid a group of older kids who liked to take her backpack and throw it into traffic. The back door of the clubhouse had been propped open with a cinder block, and the smell of coffee and engine oil had drifted out into the cold like an invitation. She had stood there, 9 years old, backpack clutched to her chest, and a man the size of a refrigerator had appeared in the doorway with a mug in his hand and grease on his forearms. "You lost?" he had asked. "No," Mara had said. "Are you?" The man had stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he had laughed, a sound like rocks rolling downhill, and stepped aside. That man was Beau Cross, mechanic, former combat engineer, 2 tours in a desert he never named, a limp in his left leg from shrapnel he never mentioned, and hands so large they made a coffee mug look like a thimble. He had introduced her to the clubhouse the way you'd introduce someone to a church, quietly, respectfully, with the understanding that the space demanded something from you in return. The clubhouse was not what anyone expected. The main room had a long wooden bar that hadn't served alcohol in 6 years, now covered with mugs and a commercial coffee maker that someone had salvaged from a bankrupt diner. Mismatched chairs surrounded tables scarred with cigarette burns and ring stains. A pool table with faded felt sat in the corner beneath a light that flickered every 40 seconds. Along one wall, a row of hooks held leather vests, cuts, they called them. Each one patched and stitched and weighted with insignia that meant nothing to the outside world and everything to the men who wore them. There was a back office with a computer and filing cabinets, a storage room filled with canned goods for the neighborhood food bank the club ran every 3rd Saturday, a small kitchen where someone was always making coffee or reheating soup, and in the far corner, near the window that faced the railroad tracks, a battered armchair with a reading lamp that everyone called Mara's spot, even though nobody had officially given it to her. She came every Tuesday after school, sometimes Thursdays. Her aunt didn't know, and Mara didn't tell her because explaining Iron Haven to someone who had never been inside it was like trying to explain color to someone who had only ever seen gray. The men who filled that room were not the kind of men the world wanted near children. They had criminal records and missing teeth and tattoos that climbed their necks like vines. They smoked on the front steps and spoke in low voices and rode machines that shook the windows of every house on the block. Mothers pulled their children closer when the Harleys passed. Store owners watched them from behind glass. The police cruised Weller Avenue twice a day, slowing at the dead end, as if proximity to the clubhouse required surveillance. But Mara knew what none of those people knew. She knew that Beau Cross spent every Saturday morning fixing bicycles for kids in the Ridgefield housing project, kids whose parents couldn't afford new ones, and that he kept a box of training wheels in the storage room because he said no kid should have to learn anything the hard way if they didn't have to. She knew that Rhea Holt, the club's medic, a former army nurse with a scar across her jaw and eyes the color of frozen rivers, ran a free first aid clinic out of the back kitchen every Wednesday, stitching cuts and checking blood pressure for people who couldn't afford the emergency room. She knew that Cole Brennan, the quiet one who sat in the back office with his headphones on and his screens glowing, had built a computer lab in the basement where neighborhood kids could do homework and access the internet because half the apartments on Ridgefield didn't have Wi-Fi. And she knew Dane Mercer, club president, the man who held Iron Haven together with nothing but silence and the kind of authority that doesn't come from volume. Dane was 53 years old, 6'2", built like the load-bearing wall of a condemned building. His hair was silver at the temples and cut military short. His face was a topographic map of damage, a scar through his left eyebrow from a bar fight in 1998, a jaw that had been broken and set wrong, lines around his mouth that came not from smiling but from years of clenching against things he refused to say out loud. He wore the same boots every day, steel-toed, scarred across the leather. His cut bore the president's patch on the front and a single word on the back that Mara had once asked about. Unbroken. He had looked at her for a long time before answering. "It's not a boast," he had said. "It's a reminder." Dane had served 3 tours. He had come home to a wife who had already moved on and a son who didn't recognize him. He had spent 2 years in a place he called the Dark, which Mara understood was not a location, but a condition. He had found Iron Haven the way most of them had, broken, angry, looking for something to hit, and had instead found something to protect. That was the word he used. Not fight, not defend. Protect. The distinction mattered to him in ways Mara didn't fully understand, but could feel in her bones. It was a Tuesday in February when everything changed. The snow had been falling since noon, the kind of dense, relentless snow that turned the sky into a white ceiling and made the streets feel like tunnels. Mara walked the 3 blocks from school with her hood up and her hands jammed into the pockets of a coat 2 sizes too big. A Goodwill find that Pauline had called practical. The cold burned her cheeks and made her eyes water, and by the time she reached Weller Avenue, her sneakers were soaked through and her toes had gone numb. The Harleys were parked under the overhang, covered in a thin layer of white. The sign above the door was barely visible through the falling snow. She pushed through the steel door and the warmth hit her like a wall. Coffee and old wood and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke that never fully left the building no matter how many times they opened the windows. Beau was at the bar, pouring coffee into a mug that said, "World's Okayest Veteran." Rhea was in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a towel. Cole was in the back office, so she could see the blue glow of his monitors through the half-open door. Dane was nowhere visible, which meant he was either in the storage room or upstairs in the small apartment he kept above the clubhouse for nights when the ride home felt too long or the silence of his empty house felt too loud. "Mara." Beau nodded without looking up. "Boots are soaked." "I know." "There's dry socks in the storage bin, 3rd shelf." "I know." She crossed the room, dropped her backpack in her corner chair, and was heading toward the storage room when the front door crashed open. Cold air flooded in. Snow swirled across the concrete floor, and a figure stumbled through the doorway. A young man, maybe 17 or 18, wearing a thin jacket that was soaked through, jeans torn at the knee, sneakers that were falling apart. His face was pale, almost blue at the lips. His eyes were wide and wild, darting around the room like an animal caught in headlights. He was shaking, not just from cold, but from something deeper, something Mara recognized because she had felt it herself. Fear. The kind that lives in your chest and makes your lungs forget how to work. He collided with Mara. Not hard, more of a desperate, uncoordinated stumble, but enough to knock her sideways. His hand grabbed her shoulder for balance, and she felt his fingers trembling through her coat. For half a second, their eyes met. His were brown, bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. Hers were gray and steady, and older than any 11-year-old's eyes had a right to be. "Sorry," he whispered. The word came out cracked like ice breaking. "I'm sorry, And then he was gone. Back through the door, into the snow, swallowed by the white. Bo was already on his feet. Rhea had stepped forward, towel still in hand. The room had shifted. That subtle, almost invisible change in atmosphere that happened whenever something crossed the threshold of Iron Haven that didn't belong. "Kid looked terrified," Rhea said quietly. "Kid looked like he was running from something," Bo corrected. Mara stood where the stranger had left her, her shoulder still warm from his grip. She looked down. On the floor at her feet, half covered by melting snow tracked in from his shoes, lay a crumpled paper napkin. She picked it up. It was damp, almost falling apart, but she could make out the logo, a coffee cup with a crack running through it, and the name printed beneath. The Fractured Cup Diner, 414 Marshall Road. She turned it over. On the back, written in pencil that was already smearing from the moisture, were numbers. A sequence she didn't recognize. Too long for a phone number. Too short for an address. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Nobody noticed. 20 minutes later, Dane came downstairs. His face carried the expression it always carried. Controlled, watchful, like a man standing in a room where the floor might give way at any moment. He crossed to the bar, poured coffee, took one sip, and stopped. His eyes moved to the back office. "Cole." The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a command. Cole appeared in the doorway, headphones around his neck, face lit by the blue glow behind him. "The back window," Dane said. "When's the last time you checked it?" Cole frowned. "This morning. Locked it myself." Dane set his mug down. "It's open." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room the way water fills a sinking ship. Slowly, then all at once, Cole disappeared into the back office. Bo moved toward the hallway that led to the rear of the building. Rhea set her towel down with the deliberate calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic is a luxury you can't afford. Mara watched from her corner. Cole's voice came from the back office, tight and controlled, and carrying an edge that Mara had never heard from him before. "Dane, you need to see this." They gathered in the back office, Dane, Bo, Rhea, and Cole, and Mara stood just outside the doorway, invisible in the way that children learn to be invisible when the adults around them are scared. The computer screen was filled with cascading error messages, red text on black, lines of code that Mara couldn't read but could feel. The way you feel electricity in a thunderstorm, not through understanding, but through instinct. "Someone planted a virus," Cole said. His voice was flat, professional, but his hands were shaking. "It's moving through the system. Financial records, tax filings, property documents, donation logs, everything we've built for 20 years. It's being deleted, not just deleted, overwritten, corrupted at the sector level. This isn't amateur work." "Can you stop it?" Dane asked. "I can slow it down, maybe, but whatever I save is going to be fragments. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were targeting." Dane's jaw tightened. The scar through his eyebrow seemed to deepen in the blue light of the monitors. He turned to Bo. "The window." Bo nodded. "Forced, from outside. Lock's been pried, but clean job, not smashed. Someone knew what they were doing." "Or someone told them how to do it," Rhea said quietly. The room went still. Dane looked at each of them in turn. His eyes carried the weight of command and the weariness of a man who had spent his entire adult life preparing for attacks that came from directions he didn't expect. He had survived ambushes in places whose names were classified. He had rebuilt his life from wreckage that most people wouldn't survive. And now, standing in the back office of the only place left in the world that he would call home, he understood with the cold clarity of a soldier that this was not a random act. Someone was trying to erase Iron Haven from existence. "Who has access to this building besides us?" he asked. "Nobody," Cole said. "The security system?" He stopped, pulled up another screen. His face went gray. The security cameras were looped. Someone recorded 45 minutes of empty hallway footage and fed it back into the system. "We've been watching a ghost for the last hour." Mara's hand went to her pocket. The napkin, the numbers on the back, the terrified boy who had crashed into her and then vanished into the snow like he was trying to outrun his own shadow. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, because Mara Quinn had learned something else about the world, something she had learned long before she found Iron Haven. She had learned that the truth is a weapon, and the person who holds it has to choose when to use it. Too early, and it's wasted. Too late, and it's useless. The timing matters more than the truth itself. She needed to know more before she said anything. The next 2 hours were controlled chaos. Cole worked on the computer with the intensity of a surgeon performing emergency triage, his fingers moving across the keyboard in bursts that sounded like gunfire. Bo secured every window and door in the building, checking locks, testing hinges, moving through the clubhouse with the methodical efficiency of a man who had cleared buildings in combat zones. Rhea made phone calls to their accountant, to the lawyer who had helped them with the property deed 5 years ago, to 2 other club members who lived on the outskirts of town. Dane stood in the center of it all, motionless, watching, thinking. Mara sat in her corner chair with her homework open on her lap, a math worksheet she hadn't touched. Her hand kept drifting to her pocket, feeling the damp napkin through the fabric of her jeans, the numbers on the back, the fractured cup, the boy's eyes. Brown, bloodshot, desperate. She had seen that look before. In mirrors, in the eyes of her mother before she stopped looking at Mara altogether, in the eyes of every kid in every waiting room of every government office she'd ever sat in. It was the look of someone who had been told to do something terrible by someone who promised it would make things better. At 5:30, Pauline texted, "Working late. Dinner in fridge. Lock deadbolt." Mara texted back a thumbs-up emoji. Then she put her phone away and made a decision. She waited until Bo was in the storage room and Rhea was on the phone in the kitchen. She waited until Cole was deep in the computer's guts and Dane was standing at the front window, watching the snow fall on Weller Avenue like he was reading a message in the pattern of the flakes. Then she walked to the back office doorway. "Cole?" He didn't look up. "Not now, Mara." "The virus. What's it targeting first?" Something in her voice made him pause. He glanced at her over his shoulder. The property records, title deeds, insurance paperwork, tax filings, 20 years of proof that we own this building and this land. If those records are gone, what happens? Cole's face was unreadable. Without proof of ownership, we're sitting in a building we can't prove is ours. Anyone with a lawyer and a filing fee could challenge our claim. Mara felt the napkin in her pocket like it was burning through the denim. "Someone wants this building," she said. It wasn't a question. Cole stared at her. Then he turned back to his screen. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Someone wants this building." She crossed the main room to where Dane stood at the window. The snow was heavier now, the streetlights turning it into a curtain of white and gold. The Harleys outside were buried up to their exhaust pipes. "Dane!" He didn't turn. "Go home, Mara. It's getting late." "I know who did it." Now he turned. Slowly. The way a weapon turns when aimed. His eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, locked onto hers with an intensity that would have made most adults take a step backward. Mara didn't move. "The kid who came through the door," she said. "The one who crashed into me. He dropped something." She pulled the napkin from her pocket and held it up. Damp, crumpled, the ink already fading, but readable. The fractured cup logo. The address. The numbers on the back. Dane took it from her hand, studied it the way a demolitions expert studies a wire, carefully, patiently, knowing that the wrong move changes everything. "Marshall Road," he said. "That's across the tracks." "I know." You didn't tell anyone about this? I'm telling you now. Dane looked at her for a long time. The snow fell behind him. The fluorescent lights buzzed above. Somewhere in the back, Cole's keyboard rattled like machine gun fire. And in the silence between heartbeats, something passed between the club president and the 11-year-old girl that neither of them would have been able to name. A recognition, a mutual understanding that the world had broken them both in similar ways, and that broken people see things that whole people miss. "Bo," Dane called, without raising his voice. "Rhea, gear up." The engines in the main room shifted. Boots hit the floor. Leather creaked. Mara pulled her hood back up. "I'm coming." "No. I'm the only one who saw his face. You need me." Dane's jaw worked. The scar above his eye caught the light. He looked at Bo, who had appeared in the doorway with his coat already on. Bo shrugged. A movement that said, "She's not wrong." "You stay behind me," Dane said. "You stay behind me, you don't talk unless I tell you to, and if I say run, you run. No arguments, no hesitation, you run." Mara nodded. The snow hit them the moment they stepped outside. 4 figures moving through the white. 3 bikers in leather, and 1 small girl in an oversized Goodwill coat, heading across the railroad tracks toward Marshall Road, toward a diner with a cracked cup on its sign, toward a boy who was drowning in something he couldn't escape alone, and toward a truth that would crack this town wide open. The Fractured Cup Diner sat on the corner of Marshall and 4th, like a bruise on the face of the neighborhood. Neon signs buzzed in the window, open, though the parking lot was nearly empty. The building was old, the kind of old that comes not from character, but from neglect. Paint peeling from the clapboard. A gutter hanging loose on one side. The smell of burnt coffee and grease seeping through the walls like a confession. They entered single file. Dane first, then Mara, then Rhea and Bo flanking like a formation they'd rehearsed 1,000 times without ever practicing. The interior was dim and yellow, a counter with cracked vinyl stools, 4 booths along the window, the vinyl patched with duct tape, a ceiling fan turning slowly, pushing warm air that smelled like old oil and desperation. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with dyed red hair and a cigarette tucked behind her ear watched them enter with the practiced indifference of someone who had seen worse walk through her door. 3 customers. An old man in a trucker hat nursing a cup of black coffee. A woman with a toddler in a booster seat, spooning mashed potatoes into the child's mouth with the mechanical rhythm of exhaustion. And in the last booth, pressed against the wall like he was trying to melt into it, the boy. Mara saw him immediately. Same thin jacket, still damp, same torn jeans, same face, but the fear had deepened, settled into something that looked less like panic and more like resignation. He was staring at the table in front of him, where his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "That's him," Mara whispered. Dane nodded once. He walked to the booth. Not fast, not slow. The way weather moves, inevitably. The boy looked up. His eyes went wide. He saw the leather, the patches, the scars, the size of Bo standing behind Dane like a wall. His hands tightened around the coffee cup. His breathing quickened. But he didn't run. Dane slid into the booth across from him. He didn't speak. He just sat there, filling the space with a silence so deliberate it had weight. Rhea stood at the end of the booth. Bo positioned himself near the door, not blocking it, just present, the way a mountain is present at the edge of a valley. Mara stood beside Rhea, watching. The boy's eyes darted between them. His lip trembled, then his jaw set. A small, desperate act of defiance. "Whatever you're gonna do," he said, "just do it." Dane leaned forward, rested his forearms on the table. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, nails short, a faded tattoo on his left wrist that read, "Still here" in block letters. "What's your name?" Dane asked. The boy blinked. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't that. "Evan," he said after a moment. "Evan Rourke." "Evan." Dane said the name like he was testing its weight. "You broke into my clubhouse tonight. You planted something on my computer. You tried to destroy 20 years of records that keep a roof over the heads of people who have nowhere else to go." Evan's face crumbled. Not all at once. Slowly, the way a wall crumbles when the foundation gives out beneath it. His eyes filled. His hands began to shake again. The coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "I know," he whispered. "I know what I did." "Then tell me why." Evan looked at the table, at his hands, at the coffee he hadn't touched. Outside, the snow fell in curtains past the buzzing neon. Inside, the ceiling fan turned. The woman behind the counter watched without watching. The world held its breath. And Evan Rourke opened his mouth to speak, and that was the exact moment the diner door swung open, letting in a blast of frozen air and two men in expensive overcoats who stopped just inside the threshold and stared directly at Dane Mercer with the calm, predatory confidence of people who had already decided how this story was going to end. The two men stood just inside the doorway like they had been cut from the same piece of expensive cloth. The taller one was mid-40s, angular face, jaw shaved so clean it looked like polished stone. His overcoat was charcoal cashmere, unbuttoned despite the cold, revealing a suit underneath that cost more than every vehicle parked outside the diner combined. His hair was dark, swept back, not a strand displaced by the wind. His eyes moved across the room with the efficient, disinterested sweep of a man cataloging inventory. The cracked stools, the duct-taped booths, the woman behind the counter, the bikers in leather, all of it assessed and dismissed in under 2 seconds. The second man was shorter, broader, built like a former athlete who had traded muscle for influence. His overcoat was navy. His shoes were Italian. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm the way a soldier carries a rifle, that close, familiar, ready. They looked at Dane the way you look at a piece of furniture you're planning to remove from a room. "Mr. Mercer," the tall one said. Not a question. A label. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this in a diner." Dane didn't stand, didn't shift. His hands stayed flat on the table, palms down, fingers still. The only movement was in his eyes, which tracked the two men the way a scope tracks a target, without emotion, without hurry, with absolute precision. "Then you should have stayed home," Dane said. The tall man smiled. It was the kind of smile that had been practiced in mirrors and boardrooms, a smile designed to communicate superiority without the inconvenience of saying it out loud. He stepped forward, pulled a chair from an empty table, and sat at the end of the booth without being invited. The shorter man remained standing, portfolio pressed against his ribs. "My name is Ren Calloway. This is my associate, Mr. Dice. We represent Ridgeline Development Partners." He paused, letting the name settle in the air like smoke. "I believe you're familiar with our correspondence." "I'm familiar with your letters," Dane said. "I used the last one to line a toolbox." Calloway's smile didn't waver. "That's colorful. But the substance of those letters hasn't changed. The parcel at 1140 Weller Avenue, your clubhouse, your parking lot, and the adjacent lot to the south sits in a zone that's been earmarked for commercial redevelopment. We've made generous offers, multiple offers, all declined without response." "Declined with response," Dane said. "The response was no." "The response was silence, Mr. Mercer, which in business tends to indicate either ignorance or stubbornness. I'm trying to determine which applies." Bo shifted near the door. The movement was small, a half step, a squaring of shoulders, but it changed the geometry of the room. Calloway glanced at him, then back at Dane, and for the first time something flickered behind the polished surface of his expression. Not fear. Calculation. Rhea hadn't moved. She stood at the end of the booth with her arms crossed, watching Calloway the way a medic watches a wound, clinically, patiently, waiting to see if the bleeding would stop on its own or require intervention. Mara pressed herself against Rhea's side, invisible in the shadow of the woman's jacket, but her eyes were open, wide open, recording everything, and Evan Rourke sat frozen in the booth, his face drained of whatever color had been left. His eyes locked on Calloway with a recognition that went beyond familiarity. It was the look of a rabbit recognizing the hawk. Calloway hadn't looked at Evan. Not once. That absence was deliberate, and Dane noticed it the way he noticed everything. Quietly, completely, filing it away in a mind that had been trained to read battlefields. "You tracked me to a diner on a Tuesday night in a snowstorm," Dane said. "That's not business. That's surveillance." "It's efficiency," Calloway said. "We've been trying to reach you through proper channels for 8 months. You don't answer calls. You don't respond to certified mail. You don't attend the zoning meetings where your property is discussed. At some point, Mr. Mercer, refusal to engage becomes its own kind of answer, and it's an answer that doesn't favor you. I don't need your favor. No, but you need your property records. Calloway let the sentence hang. His eyes never left Dane's face. Don't you? The silence that followed was surgical. It cut through the diner like a scalpel, separating everything into before and after. Before, this was a confrontation. After, it was a confession, not from Dane, but from Calloway. Because in those 6 words, he had revealed something he shouldn't have known. He had revealed that he knew about the virus. He had revealed that the timing of his appearance in this diner, minutes after the digital destruction of Ironhaven's records, was not coincidence. He had revealed that Evan Rourke was his weapon. Dane's hands didn't move. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted. A door closing, a switch being thrown, a decision being made in the space between heartbeats that would alter everything that came after. Bo, Dane said quietly, take Mara and Evan outside. Dane, now. Bo looked at Dane for 2 seconds, then he moved. One hand on Mara's shoulder, gentle, enormous, and a nod toward Evan that said get up without using words. Evan scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over his own feet, and the 3 of them moved toward the door. The shorter man, Dice, stepped aside to let them pass, and as Evan squeezed by, Mara saw Dice's hand close briefly around Evan's arm, a grip that lasted less than a second, hidden from Dane's angle by Dice's body, but visible to Mara because she was small and low and watching from beneath the radar of adult attention. She saw Evan's face twist, not pain, terror. She saw Dice's lips move. 2 words, barely a whisper. She couldn't hear them, but she could read the shape of them on his mouth. Say nothing. Then they were outside, and the cold hit her like a slap, and Bo was steering them toward the side of the building where a narrow overhang offered minimal shelter from the snow. Stay here, Bo said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight, the muscles working beneath the skin like cables under tension. Both of you, don't move. He positioned himself between them and the diner's front window, a wall of flesh and leather and combat experience that blocked the view in both directions. His eyes swept the parking lot, the street, the dark spaces between buildings where threat could hide. Mara turned to Evan. He was shaking, not from cold, though the cold was savage, cutting through his thin jacket like it wasn't there, but from something that lived deeper. His hands were jammed into his pockets, his shoulders hunched, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts that turned to fog in the freezing air. They told you to do it, Mara said. Not a question. Evan looked at her. His eyes were wet. You don't know what you're talking about. The virus, the window. They told you how to get in, where the computer was, what to plant. And they told you if you didn't do it, something bad would happen. Evan's face collapsed. It was the second time she had watched him break in the span of an hour. And this time it went deeper, past the surface crack into the foundation, into the place where the things you can't say out loud live like animals in the dark. My brothers, he whispered, Tyler and Sam. They're 8 and 6. My grandfather he's in hospice. Medicaid won't cover the facility he needs. Calloway said, he said if I did this one thing, just this one thing, he'd cover the bills. All of them. The facility, the boys' school, everything. And if you didn't? Evan's jaw trembled. He said he'd make sure social services found a reason to take them. He said he had people, connections. He said it would look like neglect. Mara felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had sat in those offices. She had watched those people make those decisions. She knew exactly how easy it was to make a family disappear into the system. Not through malice, but through paperwork. Through boxes checked and boxes left empty. Through the simple, devastating arithmetic of bureaucracy, where a missing signature or an unverified address could separate siblings and send them to different zip codes, different counties, different lives. How old are you? She asked. 17. Who takes care of them? Your brothers? I do. His voice cracked on the second word. I drop them at school. I pick them up. I make dinner. I check homework. I've been doing it since my mom left 2 years ago and my grandfather got too sick to get out of bed. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, a rough, angry gesture. You're a kid. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. Inside the diner, something was happening. Through the window, past Bo's massive frame, Mara could see Dane still seated in the booth, Calloway across from him, Rhea standing at the end like a sentinel. The conversation had shifted. She could see it in the angles of their bodies, the way Dane had leaned back slightly, creating distance, the way Calloway had leaned forward, pressing advantage. The door opened. Rhea stepped out. Her face was unreadable. The medic's mask, the combat nurse's armor, but her hands were clenched at her sides, and that told Mara everything. We're leaving, Rhea said. All of us. Now. What happened? Bo asked. Calloway's filing a formal challenge to the property title, Monday morning. Says he has evidence that the original deed transfer was improperly recorded. Her voice was controlled, clinical, but underneath it Mara could hear something she'd never heard from Rhea before. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't burn. It freezes. Evidence he manufactured, Bo said. Evidence that will look real enough to a judge who doesn't know any better. Rhea's eyes moved to Evan. An evidence that's supported by the convenient destruction of every record that could prove otherwise. Evan made a sound. Small, animal, wounded. He's a kid, Mara said. They used him. Rhea looked at Mara. Something passed between them. A current of understanding that ran beneath the surface of language, beneath the surface of age and experience, and the categories the world uses to separate people from one another. Rhea had stitched wounds in field hospitals, while mortars fell. Mara had hidden behind water heaters, while the world came apart around her. They were different in every way that could be measured and identical in every way that mattered. I know, Rhea said. Get in the truck. The drive back to Iron Haven was silent. Bo's pickup crawled through the snow-choked streets, wipers fighting a losing battle against the accumulation. Dane rode in the passenger seat, motionless, his reflection in the windshield a ghostly overlay on the white world outside. Rhea sat in the back seat with Mara and Evan on either side of her. The boy pressed against the door like he was preparing to jump. Nobody spoke. The clubhouse was warm when they returned. Cole was still at the computer, his face lit blue, his coffee cold. He looked up when they entered, read the room in half a second, and stood. How bad? He asked. Bad, Dane said. He crossed the room, took off his jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, and stood at the center of the main room with the stillness of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding not whether to jump, but which direction to fall. Calloway's filing Monday, Rhea said. Property challenge. He's going to claim the deed transfer from the county was improperly recorded and that Iron Haven has no legal right to the building. He can't do that without... Cole stopped. His face changed. Without the records being gone. Which they are, Bo said, because of him. He nodded toward Evan, who stood near the door with his arms wrapped around himself, shaking, a stray animal that had followed them home and now had nowhere left to go. The room turned. It turned the way rooms turn when the pressure that's been building finds its weakest point. Bo's face hardened, not with cruelty, but with the protective fury of a man who had spent 2 decades building something that mattered and had just watched a 17-year-old kid hand it to the enemy. Rhea's jaw tightened. Cole's hands curled into fists at his sides, then slowly uncurled, a man choosing control over instinct. He's 17, Mara said from across the room. Old enough to know what a virus does, Bo said. Old enough to be scared into doing something stupid by men in cashmere coats who threaten to take your family away. Mara's voice was steady, clear, cutting through the tension like a blade through fabric. She was standing in her corner, backpack at her feet, Goodwill coat still zipped to her chin. 11 years old and speaking with the authority of someone who had been failed by every system designed to protect her and had survived by learning to see what adults refused to look at. Dane raised one hand, palm out. The room went silent. Evan. He said the name quietly, the way you'd say the name of a bomb you were trying to defuse. Sit down. Evan sat. Fell, really. into the nearest chair, his body folding like wet cardboard. His hands gripped his knees. His knuckles were white. "Tell me everything," Dane said. "From the beginning. Don't skip anything. Don't clean anything up. Just talk." Evan talked. He talked about his mother disappearing 2 years ago. Not dead, just gone. The way parents sometimes go when the weight of their own lives becomes heavier than their love for their children. He talked about his grandfather, a retired machinist named Roy Rourke, who had worked at the Weller Avenue factory for 31 years before it closed, who had raised Evan and his brothers after their mother left, who had been diagnosed with a degenerative condition 8 months ago that slowly dismantled his body while leaving his mind trapped inside. He talked about the bills, the facility costs, the gap between what Medicaid covered and what the private hospice actually charged, a gap that widened every month like a crack in a dam. He talked about dropping out of school to work 2 jobs: dishwasher at a restaurant on 4th Street, stock clerk at a hardware store on weekends, and how neither job paid enough to cover the gap, let alone feed 2 growing boys. He talked about Calloway. The man had appeared 3 months ago, not at Evan's door, at the hospice. Sitting in the lobby when Evan arrived for his Tuesday visit, wearing that same charcoal coat, holding a folder with Evan's grandfather's name on it. He knew things. He knew about the Medicaid gap. He knew about the mother. He knew about Tyler and Sam's school, their grades, their teachers' names. He knew the landlord was threatening eviction. He knew Evan was 17 and legally responsible for nothing, which meant the state could step in at any time and redistribute his family like inventory. "He didn't threaten me," Evan said. His voice was hollow. "He didn't have to. He just laid it out. Like math. Like there was only one answer, and I was too stupid to see it." "What did he want?" Dane asked. "He said there was a building on Weller Avenue, an old building. Said it was sitting on valuable land that was being wasted. Said the people inside were squatters, basically. He said if the building's records disappeared, the legal process would take care of the rest. He said nobody would get hurt. He said it was just paperwork. And in exchange, he'd pay the hospice bills, all of them, set up a trust for Tyler and Sam, make sure social services never looked our way." Evan's voice broke. "He gave me the drive, the USB with the virus on it. He told me which window, which computer, what time. He said the security cameras would be handled. He said it would take 5 minutes. And it did," Cole said from the doorway of the back office. His voice was flat. 5 minutes to destroy everything. Evan flinched like he'd been struck. Dane stood. He moved to the window. The snow was still falling, lighter now, the flakes smaller, the sky darker. The streetlights on Weller Avenue cast orange halos through the white. The Harleys outside were buried. "Cole," he said without turning, "what did you save?" "Maybe 40%. Fragments. Some of the tax records from the last 5 years are intact. The original property deed might be recoverable. There's a backup on a drive I kept in the storage room that isn't connected to the main system. But the financial records from before 2019 are gone. The donation logs, the community program documentation, the incorporation paperwork. All of it. Is 40% enough?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "In court? Against a firm like Ridgeline with their lawyers and their manufactured evidence? I don't know. Maybe. If we can reconstruct the rest from outside sources, county records, bank statements, the accountant's copies." "That's a lot of ifs," Bo said. "It's what we have," Dane replied. The room settled into a silence that was different from the earlier ones. This wasn't the silence of shock or the silence of anger. It was the silence of men who had been in tight spaces before: foxholes, hospital rooms, courtrooms, the backs of police cars, and who understood that the difference between survival and surrender is not strength, but stubbornness. The refusal to quit, not because you believe you'll win, but because quitting is the one thing you've decided you will not do. Rhea broke the silence. "What about him?" She nodded toward Evan. The question opened a fracture in the room. Not a visible one. No raised voices, no thrown punches. But Mara felt it the way she felt shifts in atmospheric pressure, the way animals feel earthquakes before the ground moves. Bo spoke first. "He broke into our home. He destroyed our records. He handed our future to the people trying to take it." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. I don't care how old he is. I don't care what story he tells. He did this. He was coerced, Rhea said. He had a choice between losing his family and breaking a window. That's not a choice, Bo. That's a trap. It's always a trap. Every bad decision has a reason behind it. That doesn't undo the damage. Rhea turned to Bo fully, and for a moment the room held two forces in perfect opposition. Bo's rigid, scarred, immovable sense of accountability against Rhea's equally unyielding belief that damage done to people explains, if not excuses, the damage they do to others. These were not abstract positions. They were forged in experience, hammered out in war zones and emergency rooms, and the long, grinding aftermath of lives lived in proximity to violence. He's 17, Rhea said again, and Mara's 11, and she managed not to destroy anyone's life today. Mara felt herself go very still. Dane turned from the window. Enough! The word hit the room like a door slamming. Bo and Rhea fell silent. Evan sat motionless in his chair, tears running down his face without sound, his body shaking with the effort of holding together what was already coming apart. Dane walked to the center of the room. He stood directly in front of Evan. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen. Outside, a train passed on the tracks behind the building, its horn low and mournful, shaking the windows in their frames. "Look at me," Dane said. Evan looked up. His face was a ruin, red-eyed, wet, raw with the particular devastation of someone who has just realized that the worst thing they've ever done cannot be undone. "You made a choice," Dane said. "A bad one. Made under pressure, made out of fear, made because the people who should have protected you failed, and the people who exploited you knew exactly where it would hurt. None of that changes what happened. My records are gone. My club is in danger. The people who depend on this building, the families, the kids who use the computer lab, the people who come to Rhea's clinic, they're all at risk because of what you did." Evan's face crumpled further. I know, I'm not finished." Dane's voice was quiet, but it carried the gravity of a man who had commanded soldiers in conditions that stripped away every pretense and left only the essential question, what are you willing to do? You have a choice now, a real one. You can walk out that door, disappear into the snow, and hope that Calloway keeps his promises, which he won't, because men like Calloway don't keep promises, they keep leverage. Or you can stay. You can tell us everything, every name, every meeting, every detail of how they set this up. And you can help us fight. Fight? Evan's voice was barely there. Fight how? They have lawyers, they have money, they have a 17-year-old kid they coerced into committing a crime. Dane leaned forward slightly. That's not a weapon. That's a witness. The word hung in the air. Evan stared at Dane. Dane stared back. And in the space between them, in the buzzing fluorescent light and the smell of coffee and old wood and wet leather, something shifted. Not dramatically, not cinematically, but in the quiet, irreversible way that tectonic plates shift beneath the surface of the earth, changing everything above without making a sound. If I talk, Evan said slowly, Calloway will come after my brothers. Calloway is already coming after your brothers, Dane said. The only question is whether they'll have someone standing in front of them when he does. Evan's breathing was ragged. His hands gripped his knees so hard the fabric of his jeans bunched between his fingers. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at the row of leather cuts hanging by the door, each one patched and worn and weighted with meaning he didn't understand. He looked at Mara. She was standing in her corner, small and quiet, and watching him with those gray eyes that held no judgment and no mercy and no pity, only recognition. She had been where he was. She knew what it felt like to stand at the edge of a decision that would define everything after it, and she knew that the only way through was forward. Evan swallowed. His Adam's apple moved visibly beneath the thin skin of his throat. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll stay. Cole reappeared in the doorway. His face was different now, tight, focused, carrying the particular expression of someone who has just found something they weren't looking for. Dane, he said, we have a bigger problem. Talk. I've been tracing the virus, the source code, the signature patterns, the way it was built. This isn't commercial software. This isn't something Callaway bought off the shelf. It was custom built, designed specifically to target our filing structure, our directory paths, our naming conventions. The room went cold. Not from the temperature, from understanding. Someone mapped our system before tonight, Cole said. Someone who had access. Someone who knew exactly how our files were organized, where they were stored, what they were named. Bo straightened. You're saying someone on the inside. I'm saying someone who's been inside this building, inside this office, sitting at this computer. Someone who studied our system and then designed a weapon specifically to destroy it. Every set of eyes in the room moved, to the walls, to the door, to the hooks where the cuts hung, to one another. Dane's voice was low and even. How many people have had access to that computer in the last 6 months? Cole's jaw tightened. Besides you, me, Bo, and Rhea. 3. Maybe 4. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was the sound of trust fracturing, quietly, invisibly, in a room full of people who had built their lives on the belief that this place, this brotherhood, this family held together by leather and silence and shared damage, was the one thing in the world that could not be compromised. And now someone inside those walls had handed the knife to the enemy. Dane looked at the row of cuts hanging by the door. Each patch represented a name, a history, a promise. Each one had been earned in ways that couldn't be bought or faked or manufactured by men in cashmere overcoats with leather portfolios. Or so he had believed. Outside, the snow had stopped. The silence of the frozen street was absolute. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the streetlights, between the buried Harleys and the railroad tracks, and the cold, empty avenues of a town that had forgotten how to protect its own, the clock was ticking toward Monday morning, toward a courtroom, a challenge, and a truth that would either save Ironhaven or bury it forever. And the traitor was still inside the house. Dane didn't sleep that night. He stood at the window of his upstairs apartment, a single room above the clubhouse with a cot, a footlocker, and a photograph he kept face down on the shelf, and watched the snow settle over Weller Avenue like a burial shroud. The streetlights turned the white into orange. The Harleys below were shapeless mounds. The railroad tracks beyond the back fence caught the light in thin silver lines that ran into the darkness and disappeared. Behind him, the clubhouse hummed with the low-frequency energy of people refusing to rest. Cole was still at the computer, running recovery algorithms, pulling fragments from corrupted sectors like a man sifting through the wreckage of a bombed building for survivors. Bo had taken position near the front door. Not sitting, not pacing, just standing with his arms folded and his back to the wall, a human barricade. Rhea had set Evan up in the storage room with a blanket and a pillow, and the boy had fallen asleep in under 3 minutes. The way people sleep when they've been running so long that stopping feels like dying. Mara was gone. Pauline had texted at 9, and Mara had walked home through the snow with Bo trailing her at a distance in his truck, headlights off, watching until she was inside. It was a protocol they'd never discussed and never needed to. The instinct of protection operating below the level of language. Now it was 2 a.m, and Dane Mercer stood at his window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and a question that was eating through his chest like acid. Who? 4 people had accessed the back-office computer in the last 6 months besides the core 4. Cole had pulled the access logs, what remained of them, and reconstructed a partial list from backup timestamps and login fragments. 4 names. 4 members of Ironhaven who had been trusted enough to sit in that room, use that machine, and see the architecture of files that someone had later weaponized. Ray Dunn, 38. Former infantry. Ran the food bank operations every 3rd Saturday. Had been with the club for 9 years. Nadia Kern, 41. Army Logistics. Managed the donations database and coordinated with the accountant. 7 years. Marcus Webb, 44. Marine veteran. Handled building maintenance and insurance paperwork. 12 years. One of the founding generation. And Tommy Hale, 29. The youngest full-patch member. No military background. The first non-veteran the club had ever accepted. He'd come to Ironhaven 5 years ago as a volunteer, fixing leaks and painting walls. And Dane had sponsored his membership personally because he'd seen something in Tommy that reminded him of what he'd been before the war. Hungry, directionless, looking for something worth belonging to. 4 names. 1 traitor. And Dane Mercer, who had spent 30 years learning to read people in conditions where misreading them meant body bags, could not identify which one. That was the part that burned. He set the cold coffee on the shelf next to the face-down photograph and went downstairs. Cole looked up when Dane entered the back office. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the particular shade of gray that comes from staring at screens in the dark for too long. His hands had stopped shaking hours ago. They'd moved past shaking into the numb, mechanical efficiency of someone operating on fumes and stubbornness. "I found something," Cole said. Dane pulled a chair next to him. The screen was filled with lines of code, fragments of the virus's architecture, dissected and laid out like an autopsy. The virus was uploaded via USB, we knew that, but the configuration, the directory targeting, the file-specific destruction sequences, was built from a map. Someone exported our complete file tree, folder structure, naming conventions, everything. That export happened 6 weeks ago. Can you tell which account? Cole's jaw tightened. The export was run from a guest login. No name attached, but I pulled the timestamp, November 14th, 2:47 a.m. 2:47 in the morning. The clubhouse would have been empty. The security cameras, the ones that had been looped during Evan's break-in, would have been running normally. Dane felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. "Pull the camera footage from November 14th, he said. "Already tried. The footage from that week was part of the corrupted data. The virus hit the security archive first, before the financial records, before the property documents, before everything else. Whoever built this knew what order to destroy things. They wanted the cameras gone before anything else." Dane sat back. The chair creaked beneath him. The fluorescent light above buzzed its monotonous, insectile hum, and in the silence between the buzzing and the hum of the hard drive and the distant sound of the heating system pushing warm air through old ducts, Dane felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Not about the enemy. He understood Calloway, understood men like Calloway, the way a soldier understands incoming fire, as a thing to be navigated, endured, and survived. The doubt was inward, aimed at himself, at his judgment, at the fundamental question that had haunted him since the first time a soldier under his command had frozen under fire. "Can you trust the people around you?" "Wake everyone up," Dane said. "I want them here by 7. By 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, they were all in the main room. Ray Dunn sat at the bar with a mug of black coffee, his broad, weathered face carrying the unreadable expression of a man who had learned decades ago to keep his reactions stored behind his eyes. Nadia Kern stood near the pool table, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back tight, her posture military straight even after 7 years out of uniform. Marcus Webb occupied the armchair in the corner, Mara's chair, though Mara wasn't there, his massive frame making it look like children's furniture, his hands resting on his knees with the stillness of a man who moved only when movement had purpose. And Tommy Hale leaned against the wall near the kitchen doorway, hands in the pockets of his jeans, a cigarette tucked behind his ear, his eyes moving between the others with the restless energy of someone who couldn't decide whether to be worried or bored. Bo stood by the front door. Rhea sat at the far end of the bar. Cole was in the back office doorway, laptop balanced on his forearm. Evan was nowhere visible. Dane had told Rhea to keep him in the storage room until further notice. Dane stood in the center of the room. He had not changed clothes from the night before. His eyes carried the flat, depthless quality of extreme fatigue held at bay by sheer force of will. His voice when he spoke was quieter than usual, which everyone in the room understood meant the opposite of calm. Someone in this room helped Ren Calloway try to destroy Iron Haven. The words landed like a grenade with a long fuse. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the reactions came. Not in words, but in the involuntary physical language of bodies under sudden pressure. Ray's hand tightened around his mug. Nadia's arms unfolded, then refolded. Marcus shifted forward in the armchair, the springs groaning beneath him. And Tommy Hale pulled his hands from his pockets, slowly, and let them hang at his sides. "Someone exported our complete file structure 6 weeks ago," Dane continued, "from this office. At 2:47 in the morning, That export was used to build the virus that destroyed our records last night. The virus was custom designed. It targeted our specific files, our specific directories, in a specific order that maximized damage. This was not an outside job. This was someone who sat in that office, used that computer, and handed our architecture to the people who are trying to take our home. Silence. The coffee maker hissed in the kitchen. Outside, a car passed on Weller Avenue, tires crunching through frozen slush. "That's a serious accusation," Marcus said. His voice was deep, measured, carrying the authority of a man who had been with the club since the beginning. Since the building was a shell and the membership was 5 men who met in a parking lot. "You're saying one of us is a traitor." "I'm saying someone who had access to that computer is responsible for what happened last night. If you've got a better word for it, I'd love to hear it." Ray set his mug down. "You've known me 9 years, Dane. I've loaded food trucks in blizzards. I've cleaned this floor on my hands and knees. You look me in the eye and tell me you think I sold this place out." "I'm not accusing anyone specifically. I'm telling you what the evidence shows." "The evidence shows a timestamp," Nadia said, her voice sharp, clinical, the logistics officer's brain cutting through the emotion to the data. "A guest login and a timestamp. No name, no video, no witness. That's not evidence. That's a gap." "The gap is the point," Cole said from the doorway. "Whoever did this was careful enough to use a guest account and smart enough to make sure the cameras were the first thing the virus ate. They knew our system well enough to cover their tracks." "Then how do you know it was one of us?" Tommy asked. His voice was casual, almost too casual. The voice of someone trying to sound unconcerned while every muscle in his body was running at tension. "Could have been anyone. A break-in. Like the kid." "The kid didn't have access 6 weeks ago," Dane said. "The kid didn't know our file structure. The kid was given a USB drive and told which window to open. He was the delivery mechanism. Someone else was the architect." Tommy's jaw worked. He reached behind his ear, pulled the cigarette out, rolled it between his fingers. "So what? You're going to interrogate us? Line us up? This isn't a barracks, Dane. This is a brotherhood." "Brotherhood is exactly why we're having this conversation instead of calling the police." The sentence landed like a blade on a table. Clean, deliberate, final. Tommy stared at Dane. Dane stared back. And in the space between them, the tension was not the tension of enemies, but the far more dangerous tension of people who had trusted each other and now felt that trust cracking beneath the weight of something they couldn't see. Marcus stood. The armchair groaned with relief. He was the oldest, the biggest, the most deeply rooted in this place, and when he moved, the room's center of gravity shifted with him. "I'll open my phone," he said. "Right now. Texts, calls, emails, bank statements. Anyone who wants to clear themselves can do the same." He placed his phone on the bar, face up. Unlocked. Nadia pulled hers out, set it next to Marcus's. Her face was tight, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on Dane with an intensity that was neither hostile nor submissive. It was the look of a soldier standing for inspection, daring the inspector to find fault. Ray dug his phone from his jacket pocket, placed it on the bar without ceremony, and picked his coffee back up. 3 phones on the bar. 3 sets of eyes on Tommy Hale. Tommy hadn't moved. His cigarette was still between his fingers, unlit, rolling back and forth with the slow rhythm of a metronome. His eyes had gone somewhere else. Not distant exactly, but internal, the way eyes go when the brain behind them is running calculations at speed. "Tommy," Dane said, "I'm thinking." "Think with your phone on the bar." Tommy laughed. It was a short, humorless sound that came from the back of his throat like a cough. "You already decided it's me, haven't you?" "I haven't decided anything. That's why we're here." "Right. That's why everyone's looking at me. That's why the 3 of them put their phones down like they're laying cards on the table and I'm the one holding." He pushed off the wall. His posture had changed. The casual lean was gone, replaced by something straighter, harder, the posture of a man who has realized that the ground beneath him is no longer solid. "I didn't do this, Dane. I didn't sell you out. I didn't sell anyone out." "Then put your phone down." Tommy's hand went to his pocket. Stayed there. His eyes moved across the room. Bo by the door, Rhea at the bar, Cole in the doorway. The three phones lying face up on the scarred wood like exhibits in a trial. There are things on my phone, Tommy said slowly, that don't have anything to do with Calloway. Nobody's asking about your personal life, Rhea said. Yeah, you say that now, but once it's on the bar, it's on the bar. Everyone sees everything. His voice had shifted, lower, tighter, the edges fraying. I've got 5 years in this club, 5 years. I came here with nothing. I painted these walls. I fixed the roof in the middle of a thunderstorm because nobody else would climb up there. And now you're treating me like a suspect because I won't hand over my phone like a kid caught cheating on a test. You're treating yourself like a suspect, Bo said from the door. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection, which made it more devastating than any shout. 3 people put their phones down. You're giving speeches. Tommy turned to Bo. Something flashed in his eyes. Hurt, anger, the specific kind of rage that comes from feeling cornered by people you thought were on your side. You know what? Fine. He pulled the phone from his pocket and slammed it on the bar hard enough to rattle the coffee mugs. Go ahead. Read it all out. Every text, every call, every search. And when you're done finding nothing, I want an apology from every single one of you. Cole moved to the bar. He picked up Tommy's phone first, the obvious choice, the one carrying the most emotional weight, and began scrolling with the practiced deficiency of someone who reads data the way most people read road signs. The room waited. Ray drank his coffee. Marcus stood with his arms at his sides, immovable. Nadia watched Cole's face the way a sniper watches a target, through a narrow field of focus, looking for the smallest change in expression. Cole stopped scrolling. His finger hovered over the screen. His face didn't change. It went blank, which was worse than any expression, because blankness in Cole Brennan meant the data had just told him something his brain was refusing to process in real time. Cole? Dane said. Cole looked up. His eyes met Dane's, and in that exchange, invisible to everyone else in the room, communicable only between 2 men who had spent years reading each other in situations where miscommunication meant catastrophe, something was transmitted. Something terrible. It's not Tommy, Cole said. The relief that flooded Tommy's face was immediate, total, and lasted exactly 1 second. Because Cole was still looking at Dane and his expression wasn't relief. It was devastation. Show me, Dane said. Cole turned the phone around. But he wasn't showing Tommy's messages. He had used Tommy's phone to access something else. A shared club calendar, a scheduling system that all members use to coordinate building access. And on that calendar, in the entry for November 14th, was a notation that Dane had never seen. Building check, 2 a.m., MK. MK. Marcus Webb's initials were MW. Ray Dunn's were RD. Tommy Hale's were TH. The only person in his room whose initials were MK was not in the room. Nadia, Dane said quietly. Your maiden name. Nadia Kern, born Nadia Molina Kern, stared at the phone in Cole's hand, and in the span of 3 seconds, every line of military discipline, every wall of logistics-trained composure, every barrier she had constructed between herself and the world collapsed inward like a building losing its skeleton. She didn't run. She didn't deny. She stood perfectly still, arms at her sides, and let the silence wrap around her like a shroud. Why? Dane asked. 1 word, the only word that mattered. Nadia's eyes were dry. That was the thing that struck Mara later, when she heard the story from Rhea. Nadia's eyes were completely dry. Not with the hardness of defiance, but with the emptiness of someone who had used up every tear a long time ago and had nothing left. Because he has my daughter, Nadia said. The room stopped. Not the performative silence of earlier. Not the silence of accusation and defense, and the theatrical rhythms of confrontation. This was biological silence, the silence of hearts pausing between beats, the silence of lungs forgetting to draw air, the silence that follows the detonation of something you didn't know was buried. Your daughter, Dane repeated. Elena, she's 14. She lives with my ex-husband in Garland. Or she did. Nadia's voice was flat, toneless, the voice of someone reporting battlefield casualties. 6 months ago, Victor moved. No forwarding address. No notice. He pulled her out of school and disappeared. I filed with the court. I called the police. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford. Nothing. Nobody could find them. She paused, swallowed. The movement was visible, the muscles of her throat working against something that refused to go down. Calloway found me 4 months ago. Same approach as the boy. He knew things. He knew where Elena was. He had photographs, recent ones, taken outside a school I didn't recognize, in a neighborhood I'd never seen. He showed them to me on his phone and then put it away. Her voice cracked on the last word, a hairline fracture in the monotone. He said he could make Victor give her back. He said he had connections, family court, child services. He said all he needed was a small piece of cooperation. The file export, Cole said. His voice had lost its technical edge. It was just a voice now. Human, bruised, struggling with a reality that didn't fit inside any algorithm. Nadia nodded. He gave me a flash drive, told me to run it in the back office, said it would copy the file structure, nothing else. He said it was for a property assessment, a routine survey. I knew it wasn't. I knew. Her jaw tightened. But he had pictures of my daughter, standing outside a school, wearing a jacket I'd mailed her for her birthday that she never thanked me for because Victor told her I was dead. The fluorescent light buzzed. The coffee maker gurgled. Outside, a Harley rumbled past. Not one of theirs, just a passing rider. The engine note rising and falling like a question asked and abandoned. Beau's face had changed. The rigid fury was gone, replaced by something far more complex, a landscape of emotion that included anger and empathy and the particular devastating recognition of a man who understood coercion because he had watched it destroy people in theater after theater of war. "You should have told us," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. "You should have walked into this room and told us what was happening." "And what would you have done?" Nadia's eyes finally found his. They were still dry, still empty, but behind the emptiness was something that burned. "Would you have found her? Would you have gotten her back? You fix bicycles on Saturdays, Beau. You're not equipped for this. None of us are. So you gave them the keys to our house. I gave them a file tree to get a photograph of my daughter. And now our house is burning." Nadia flinched. The first visible crack. A small movement. A tightening of the shoulders, a dip of the chin. But in a woman who had held herself in perfect military composure through the entire confrontation, it was the equivalent of a scream. Dane hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the room with the stillness of a man who has just received news that changes the shape of everything he knows, and who is taking the time, second by second, breath by breath, to rebuild his understanding of the world around this new, terrible fact. He had trusted Nadia for 7 years. She had managed the club's finances with precision and transparency. She had stayed late to reconcile donation records. She had organized the annual community dinner, cooked meals for members' families, sat with Dane on the back steps after meetings, and talked about the gap between the lives they'd planned and the lives they'd gotten. And for 4 of those months, she had been carrying a secret that was eating her alive. "Where is Elena now?" Dane asked. "I don't know. Calloway showed me the pictures and said he'd arrange a meeting after the job was done. The records are gone now. The job is done. And he hasn't called." "He won't," Dane said. "You know that." Nadia's composure finally broke. Not with tears. Something worse. A sound came from her that was barely human. A low, compressed noise from deep in her chest. The sound of a person who has been holding something so heavy for so long that the muscles have finally given out. Rhea moved, not fast, deliberately, with the measured pace of a woman who understood that speed could shatter a person in Nadia's condition, and placed one hand on Nadia's shoulder. The touch was light, clinical, professional, but Nadia leaned into it like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. Marcus sat back down in the armchair. His face carried an expression that Mara would later learn was grief. Not for something lost, but for something revealed, the particular grief of discovering that a person you trusted was not lying to you, but drowning beside you in silence. "So Calloway has a pattern," Cole said from the doorway. His voice was regaining its technical precision, his brain routing around the emotional damage to reach the analytical core. "Evan," a 17-year-old kid with a sick grandfather and two little brothers. Nadia, a mother who can't find her daughter. He identifies people with leverage points and applies pressure at the exact spot where they'll break. He doesn't break them, Dane said. He makes them break themselves. Same result. No, not the same, because the people he uses aren't enemies, they're casualties. The distinction settled over the room like a change in pressure. Bo uncrossed his arms. Tommy let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like the entire confrontation. Ray set his mug down and rubbed his face with both hands. The gesture of a man recalibrating, adjusting to a reality that was uglier and more complicated than the one he'd woken up in. So what now? Marcus asked. We know who did it. We know why. That doesn't fix the records. It doesn't stop the filing on Monday. No? Dane said. It doesn't. He walked to the window. The snow had started again, lighter this time, scattered flakes that drifted more than fell. The morning light was gray, the sky a flat ceiling of cloud that pressed down on the rooftops like a weight. Cole, can you trace the photographs Calloway showed Nadia? Cole was already thinking. If they were taken recently and geotagged, maybe. If he sent them via text or email, there might be metadata. Nadia, did he send them to your phone? No. He showed them on his phone and then deleted the conversation in front of me. I saw the screen. The message thread was gone. What carrier? What app? Standard text messaging. I saw the contact name. It was listed as property assessment. Cole nodded. I can work with that. If there's a phone number behind that contact, I can trace it. And if the photos exist anywhere on any server, there's a trail. Do it, Dane said. Priority 1. Before the records, before the filing, before everything else, we find Elena. The room absorbed this. It was a strategic decision that defied conventional logic. With the Monday filing looming, every resource should have been directed at reconstructing the destroyed records. Finding a missing teenager was a mission that could take days, weeks, months. It was a diversion of time and energy that Ironhaven could not afford. But Dane Mercer did not run Ironhaven like a business. He ran it like a unit, and in his unit, the mission was never the objective. The mission was the people. Nadia, he said, turning from the window, you're grounded. You don't leave this building. You don't contact anyone outside this room. You don't touch a computer or a phone until we have Elena's location confirmed. You're benching me. I'm protecting you. Calloway knows you're compromised. The moment he realizes we know about you, you become a liability to him. And liabilities get discarded. You stay here. You eat here. You sleep here. And when this is over, we'll deal with what you did. And what about what he did? To me? To Evan? To every person he's squeezed? Dane's eyes held hers. That's what Monday is for. The rest of the day was a controlled hurricane. Cole disappeared into the back office with Nadia's phone records and the fragments of data he'd pulled from the virus architecture. Bo made a run to the county recorder's office, hunting for paper copies of the property documents that had been destroyed digitally. Marcus called the club's accountant, a retired CPA named Dorothy Vance, who had been doing Ironhaven's taxes for free since 2008, and asked her to pull every backup copy of every financial document she had ever received. Ray opened the food bank storage room and turned it into a makeshift war room, taping hand-drawn timelines and lists of names to the cinder block walls with duct tape. Tommy Hale, still vibrating with residual anger from being suspected and cleared within the span of 20 minutes, volunteered for the job nobody wanted, babysitting Evan Rourke. He brought the teenager a plate of scrambled eggs from the kitchen and sat across from him in the storage room without speaking, the silence between them carrying the awkward, fragile energy of two people who had both been wounded by the same machine and didn't yet know how to talk about it. Rhea stayed with Nadia. She checked her blood pressure, her heart rate, her breathing, the clinical assessment of a woman who understood that emotional trauma manifests in the body as surely as a bullet wound. Nadia's blood pressure was elevated. Her hands trembled. She hadn't eaten in 18 hours. You need food, Rhea said. I need my daughter. You need both. And you'll be no use to Elena if you collapse before we find her. Nadia ate. Mechanically, joylessly, the food disappearing into her body like fuel into an engine that was running on fumes. And between bites, she talked. Not the controlled, toneless recitation of the morning, but the raw, unstructured outpouring of someone who had been carrying a weight alone for so long that the act of sharing it was itself a kind of collapse. She talked about Elena as a baby, as a toddler who used to fall asleep on Nadia's chest, as a 7-year-old who drew pictures of motorcycles because she thought her mother's friends were the coolest people in the world. She talked about the divorce, Victor's cruelty, his manipulation, the way he had spent years building a case that Nadia was unfit, citing her club membership, her veteran status, her nightmares, her scars. She talked about the custody hearing where a judge who had never worn a uniform and never seen a wound looked at Nadia's psych evaluation and decided that a woman who woke up screaming 3 nights a week was not a suitable primary parent. "The system took my daughter," Nadia said, "and when the system couldn't protect her from the man it gave her to, I went outside the system. And this is where I ended up." Ria said nothing. She sat beside Nadia in the dim light of the storage room and held the silence the way a vessel holds water. Carefully, completely, without trying to shape it into something more comfortable. At 4:17 that afternoon, Cole emerged from the back office. His face had changed again. Not the blank mask of earlier, not the devastation of discovery. This was something new. The focused, electric expression of a man who has followed a thread through a labyrinth and found, at the end of it, not a wall but a door. "I found the photos," he said. "The ones Calloway showed Nadia. They were routed through a burner number, but the images were taken on a phone with geotagging enabled. Whoever took them didn't scrub the metadata." "Where?" Dane asked. Cole held up his laptop screen. "A map. A red pin on a location 47 miles northeast, in a town called Bridger Falls, a place none of them had heard of, population 8,000, 2 gas stations, 1 school. "Elena's there," Cole said, "or she was 6 weeks ago when these photos were taken." Dane looked at the map, at the red pin, at the distance between it and the clubhouse. "Bo, Marcus, gear up." "Dane!" Ria's voice came from the storage room doorway. "It's Wednesday night. The filing is Monday. You leave now, you lose a day." "I lose a day," Dane said, "or I lose Nadia. And if I lose Nadia, I lose whatever's left of this club's soul." He pulled his jacket from the hook. The leather creaked, cold, stiff, worn into the shape of his shoulders like a second skin. "Cole stays here, runs the reconstruction. Tommy and Ray help. Ria, you're in charge until I'm back." He stopped at the door, turned. His eyes found Nadia, who stood in the storage room doorway with Ria's hand on her shoulder, and an expression on her face that was somewhere between hope and the terror of hoping. "I'm bringing your daughter home," Dane said, "and when I do, you and I are going to have a conversation about what trust means in this club and what it costs to break it, but that conversation happens after, not before." Nadia nodded. She couldn't speak. The muscles of her throat were locked against something that was trying to come up from her chest. A sound, a word, a cry. And she held it down with the discipline of a woman who had spent her entire adult life holding things down. Dane, Bo, and Marcus walked out into the cold. The Harleys were buried under 3 inches of fresh snow. They brushed them off in silence, gloves scraping across chrome, ice cracking on leather seats, the ritual of preparation that preceded every ride, every mission, every movement towards something that couldn't be taken back. The engines fired. 3 Harleys, 3 voices, 3 frequencies of mechanical thunder that merged into a single sound that rolled down Weller Avenue and shook the windows of every building on the block. The sound traveled through the falling snow, through the gray afternoon light, through the frozen streets of a town that had no idea what was happening in the dead-end building at the end of the avenue. Mara heard them from her aunt's apartment. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her math homework still untouched, a mug of hot chocolate growing cold between her hands. She recognized the engines, Dane's, Bo's, Marcus's, by sound alone, the way a musician recognizes instruments in an orchestra. She went to the window and watched the 3 headlights cut through the snow, heading east toward the railroad crossing, growing smaller, dimmer, until they were swallowed by the white. She stood at the window for a long time after they disappeared. Back at the clubhouse, Cole worked. The reconstruction was painstaking, piecing together corrupted files from fragments, cross-referencing with bank statements that Dorothy Vance had faxed over. rebuilding the chain of ownership documentation that proved Iron Haven's right to exist on the land it occupied. It was the digital equivalent of archaeology, sifting through rubble for artifacts that could tell the story of what had been there before the destruction. Tommy and Ray worked beside him in shifts, scanning paper documents, entering data, making phone calls to county offices that were closed for the day, and leaving messages that mixed urgency with the kind of stubborn politeness that comes from knowing that the person on the other end of the voicemail has no reason to care about your emergency but might respond to your courtesy. Evan watched from the corner of the storage room, blanket around his shoulders, plate of eggs empty on the floor beside him. He watched the way a person watches a house being rebuilt after a fire they started, with guilt and fascination and the agonizing desire to help and the paralyzing fear that their help would make it worse. At 9:30, Ria's phone rang. She answered on the second ring, listened for 45 seconds without speaking. Her face changed, slowly, incrementally, the way a landscape changes when clouds move across the sun. When she hung up, she stood motionless for a moment, her hand still holding the phone against her thigh, her eyes fixed on something that wasn't in the room. "Ria," Cole called from the back office. She walked to the doorway. Her face was controlled, composed, locked down behind the medic's mask that she wore like armor. But her voice, when it came, carried a tremor that no amount of training could suppress. "That was Dane. They found Elena." She paused. "They also found something else. Victor, Nadia's ex, he's been working for Ridgeline Development for 2 years. He's not just the ex-husband, he's Callaway's local operations manager. The custody disappearance, the move, the vanishing act, it wasn't a father running. It was an employee relocating. Callaway didn't just use Nadia. He manufactured the entire situation. He put Victor on payroll, told him to take Elena and vanish, and then used the daughter's disappearance as the leverage to break the mother." The room went still. Cole's hand stopped moving on the keyboard. Tommy leaned against the wall with his mouth slightly open. Ray set down the stack of papers he was holding and stared at Ria as if she had just described the architecture of a nightmare. And in the storage room, behind the half-closed door, Nadia Kern heard every word. She stood in the dim light with her back against the cinder block wall and her hands pressed flat against the cold surface, as if the wall were the only thing holding her upright. Her eyes were still dry. They would remain dry for 3 more hours, until 2:15 in the morning, when she would finally sit down on the storage room floor and cry without sound for 27 minutes, while Ria sat beside her in the dark and said nothing and held her hand and let her break. But that was later. Now, in this moment, with the snow falling outside and the fluorescent lights buzzing above, and the sound of Cole's keyboard resuming its frantic rhythm, and the distant rumble of 3 Harleys somewhere on a frozen highway heading back through the night with a 14-year-old girl they had never met wrapped in a leather jacket that smelled like engine oil and safety. In this moment, Nadia pressed her hands against the wall and felt the cold seep into her palms and understood 2 things with absolute crystalline clarity. The first was that Ren Callaway was not a businessman. He was a predator who used families as weapons, children as leverage, and human desperation as currency. And he had been doing it long enough to build a system around it, a machine with moving parts and employees and budgets that processed human suffering into profit with the efficiency of an assembly line. The second was that she was no longer afraid of him. She was something far more dangerous to a man like Callaway. She was angry. And in 4 days, that anger would walk into a courtroom and sit down across from him and show him what happens when you try to break someone who has already been broken by worse. They came back at 3 in the morning. Mara heard the engines first. She was awake, had been awake since midnight, sitting cross-legged on her bed in the dark with the window cracked open an inch despite the cold, listening to the silence of Ridgefield Street the way a sailor listens to the ocean before a storm. The sound reached her in pieces. First a vibration in the floor, then a distant growl that separated into 3 distinct frequencies, then the unmistakable thunder of Harleys turning onto Weller Avenue, moving slow, engines low, the sound of machines carrying something precious. She went to the window. 3 headlights, 3 riders, and on the back of Dane's bike, arms wrapped around his waist, face pressed against the back of his leather jacket, a figure too small to be an adult, and too still to be anything other than exhausted. "Elena," Mara watched the bikes pull into the clubhouse lot, watched the engines die one by one, watched Dane swing off his Harley and reach back to help the girl dismount. Elena's legs buckled when they hit the ground. Dane caught her, one arm around her shoulders, steady, unhurried, and walked her toward the door. Bo flanked left. Marcus flanked right. The formation was automatic, unconscious, the muscle memory of men who had escorted people through danger zones so many times that protection had become a reflex indistinguishable from breathing. The clubhouse door opened, light spilled out. And then they were inside, and Mara couldn't see anymore. She stayed at the window for another 20 minutes, watching the snow fall on the empty street, watching the light behind the clubhouse windows shift and move as people moved inside. Then she closed the window, got back into bed, and lay staring at the ceiling until her alarm went off at 6:30. She was at the clubhouse by 7:15. She didn't knock. She never knocked. The steel door was heavy in her hands, colder than usual, and when it swung open, the warmth that hit her carried something different. Not just coffee and old wood, but the dense, complicated atmosphere of a room where too many things had happened in too few hours. Elena was asleep on the couch against the far wall, buried under 2 blankets and Bo's jacket. She was thin, thinner than a 14-year-old should be, her wrists narrow, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that was too pale. Her dark hair was tangled, unwashed, spread across the pillow like something that had been neglected. Even in sleep, her face carried tension. The muscles around her eyes tight, her jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists beneath the blankets. Nadia sat on the floor beside the couch, not in a chair. On the floor, her back against the couch frame, her head tilted back so that it rested against the cushion next to her daughter's hip. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Her hand reached up and back, resting on the blanket near Elena's fist, not touching, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to give the girl space. The posture of a mother who had learned that reunion is not a single moment but a process, and that the distance between them could not be closed by proximity alone. Mara set her backpack in her corner and went to find Dane. He was in the back office with Cole. Both men looked like they'd been fed through a machine and spat out the other side. Eyes hollow, skin gray, the particular exhaustion that goes beyond physical fatigue into something systemic, something that settles into the marrow. The office was a disaster. Printouts covered every surface. Cole had 3 monitors running, each displaying different data, financial records on one, legal documents on the second, and on the third, a sprawling timeline that connected names and dates and transactions with lines that crisscrossed like a web. 4 days, Cole was saying when Mara appeared in the doorway. We have until Monday morning. Dorothy sent over everything she had, tax filings from 2008 through 2024, copies of the annual reports, bank correspondence. I've cross-referenced what she has with the fragments I recovered from the corrupted drive. We're at maybe 65% reconstruction. Is 65 enough? Dane asked. For a normal property challenge, yes. But Calloway isn't filing a normal challenge. He's going to argue that the original deed transfer from the county was fraudulent, that Iron Haven never legally acquired the property. To defend against that, we need the original 1987 transfer documents, the county resolution authorizing the sale, and the chain of title going back to the factory closure. And we have those. Cole's silence was the answer. The county recorder's office, Dane said. Bo went yesterday. The physical files from 1987 are in deep storage. The clerk said it could take 2 to 3 weeks to pull them. We have 4 days. I know. Dane leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. His eyes moved to the ceiling, then to the wall, then to the photograph he kept face down on the shelf. The one he never turned over, the one that sat there like a closed door he refused to open. There's another way, Cole said carefully. The county's digital records go back to 1995. Before that, everything was paper. But there's an archive, a state-level database that was compiled in 2002 when they digitized historical property records for the whole county. If the 1987 transfer was included in that digitization, there's a copy in the state system. Can you access it? Not remotely. The database isn't online. It's on a closed system at the county administrative building. I'd need to go there in person, request access, and search manually. Then go. It's an 8-hour drive, and the office is only open Thursday and Friday this week. They're closed for staff training on Monday, which means if I don't find it by Friday close of business, it doesn't exist. Dane looked at his watch. Thursday. 48 hours until the administrative office closed. 72 hours until the hearing. And somewhere in a state database that may or may not contain the document they needed, the proof of Iron Haven's right to exist sat waiting to be found or confirmed absent. Go now, Dane said. Take my truck. Don't stop. Cole stood. He didn't argue, didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions about what would happen if the document wasn't there. He packed his laptop, grabbed his coat, took the keys Dane held out, and was gone in under 2 minutes. The efficiency of a man who understood that time was the one resource that couldn't be replenished. The clubhouse felt emptier with Cole gone. Smaller. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the air thicker with the accumulated tension of a week that had compressed a lifetime of conflict into a handful of days. Mara stood in the back office doorway, watching Dane sit alone at the desk, surrounded by the wreckage of their records. He hadn't acknowledged her presence. His hands were flat on the desk, palms down, fingers spread. The same position she'd seen in the diner, the same gesture of a man holding himself steady against forces that wanted to pull him apart. Dane. He looked up. His eyes found hers, and for a moment the mask slipped. Just a fraction, just enough for Mara to see behind it. And what she saw was not the club president, not the veteran, not the commander. It was a tired man who was running out of options and running out of time, and who had spent so many years protecting other people that he had forgotten what it felt like to need protection himself. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked. "It's Thursday. I have a half day." That's not an answer. Neither is sitting in a dark office staring at papers that aren't going to arrange themselves. The corner of Dane's mouth moved. Not a smile. The ghost of one. The shadow of what a smile would look like on a face that had forgotten the mechanics. "Evan wants to help," Mara said. "Evan's 17. He needs to be with his brothers. Tommy drove him home last night, picked him up this morning. Tyler and Sam are at school. Evan's in the main room right now, sitting at the bar, staring at the wall. He looks like he's going to throw up or start swinging. Either way, he needs something to do." Dane was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, gathered a stack of printouts from the desk, and walked past Mara into the main room. Evan was exactly where Mara had described, perched on a bar stool, hunched over, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. When Dane set the stack of papers in front of him, Evan looked up with the startled expression of a dog expecting to be hit. "These are bank statements from 2015 through 2020, Dane said. "Each one needs to be matched with the corresponding entry on this spreadsheet." He placed a printed spreadsheet next to the stack. "You know how to read a bank statement?" Yeah. My grandfather taught me." "Then start. Red pen for discrepancies. Blue for matches. Don't guess. If you're not sure, set it aside and ask." Evan stared at the papers, then at Dane, then at the papers again. His hands were trembling, the fine, continuous vibration of someone whose nervous system was still processing the magnitude of what they'd done and what they were now being asked to help undo. "Why are you letting me do this?" he asked. "Because I need every hand I can get, and because the best way to fix something you broke is to help rebuild it." Evan picked up the red pen. His hand shook. He set the pen down, pressed his palm flat against the bar until the shaking stopped, picked the pen up again, and began reading the first statement. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled desperation. Ray Dunn drove to the county recorder's office on Thursday morning and refused to leave until a clerk agreed to initiate an expedited search of the deep storage archives. He sat in the plastic chair of the waiting area for 6 hours, reading a paperback Western, drinking vending machine coffee, and politely declining every suggestion that he come back next week. At 4:30, a supervisor appeared with a cardboard box containing files from 1986 through 1988. Ray carried the box to his truck like it contained a transplant organ. Marcus Webb canvassed the neighborhood. He went door to door on Weller Avenue and the surrounding blocks, talking to longtime residents, business owners, anyone who had been in the area when the factory closed and the property changed hands. He was looking for witnesses, people who could testify to Iron Haven's continuous presence and community contributions. By Thursday evening, he had 17 signed statements. By Friday morning, he had 23. Tommy Hale took over the food bank operations, handling the Saturday distribution prep that Ray couldn't do while sitting in a government office. He organized volunteers, sorted donations, and made 3 trips to the wholesale warehouse in Bo's truck, each time returning with the bed loaded and his face set in the grim determination of a man proving something to himself. Rhea managed the medical clinic on Wednesday as scheduled, then spent every other waking hour coordinating with the club's lawyer, a woman named Judith Pace, who operated out of a one-room office above a laundromat on 5th Street, and who had been representing Iron Haven pro bono for 9 years. Judith was small, sharp, exhausting in the way that brilliant people are exhausting, and she processed the information Rhea gave her with the rapid, merciless efficiency of a mind that ran on caffeine and indignation. "Coercion of a minor," Judith said over the phone on Thursday night, her voice crackling with energy. "Coercion of a veteran with a custody vulnerability. Manufactured disappearance of a child to create leverage. Unauthorized surveillance. Corporate conspiracy to defraud." If even half of what you're telling me is provable, Calloway doesn't just lose the hearing, he loses his license, he loses his firm, he loses everything. "Can we prove it?" Rhea asked. "That depends on your tech guy. And on the boy. And on whether the woman is willing to testify. She's willing. Then we have a chance, a real one. But I need every piece of documentation you can give me by Sunday night. Every fragment, every printout, every signed statement, every scrap of metadata your tech man pulls from those photographs. Everything." The pressure was a physical thing. It lived in the walls of the clubhouse, in the buzz of the fluorescent lights, in the rattle of the heating system, in the smell of coffee that was brewed and consumed and brewed again in a cycle that never stopped. People moved through the building at all hours, entering, leaving, carrying boxes, making calls, arguing, reconciling, working in silence side by side with the particular intensity of people who understand that the thing they are trying to save is not a building, but a home. Evan worked at the bar for 14 hours straight on Thursday. He matched bank statements to spreadsheet entries with a precision that surprised everyone, including himself. When he found discrepancies, and there were several small errors in data entry that had accumulated over years, he flagged them in red and wrote explanatory notes in the margin with handwriting that was neat and careful and belonged to a boy who had been taught by a dying grandfather that details matter. At 11 o'clock Thursday night, Mara found him asleep at the bar, his head resting on a stack of papers, the red pen still in his hand. She pulled Bo's spare jacket from the hook and draped it over his shoulders without waking him. Elena woke on Thursday afternoon. She sat up on the couch, looked around the clubhouse with the disoriented expression of someone emerging from a long tunnel, and found her mother sitting on the floor beside her. They didn't speak. Not at first. Nadia reached up and took Elena's hand, and Elena let her, and they sat like that for 7 minutes, Mara counted, without a word. Then Elena said, "He told me you were dead." And Nadia said, "I'm not." And Elena said, "I know." And that was all. 2 sentences and a confirmation. The beginning of a bridge that would take months to build and years to trust, but that had to start with 3 words spoken in a room full of strangers who understood that some things are too broken to fix with language and too important to leave unspoken. Friday. Cole called at noon. Dane answered on the first ring. The main room went silent. Bo at the door, Rhea at the bar, Marcus in the armchair, Tommy in the kitchen doorway, Evan at the bar with his red pen frozen mid-notation, Mara in her corner with a textbook open on her lap. Every pair of eyes locked on Dane's face as he listened to whatever Cole was saying on the other end of the line. Dane's expression didn't change. That was the terrifying part. His face remained perfectly still, controlled, locked, giving nothing away, while his eyes did something that Mara had never seen them do before. They closed. Not a blink. A slow, deliberate closing, the way a man closes his eyes when a doctor tells him the test results. The way a soldier closes his eyes when the radio goes silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then they opened. "How complete?" Dane asked. Cole's voice was tinny through the phone speaker, audible only as rhythm and cadence, not words. "Bring everything," Dane said. "Drive through the night if you have to. I need you here by Saturday evening. He hung up, set the phone on the bar, looked at the room. He found it, Dane said, the original 1987 transfer resolution, complete, notarized, filed in the state database exactly the way it should have been. The county's copy was destroyed in a records room flood in 1993, which is why it wasn't in the local archives. But the state backup is intact. The room exhaled. Not celebration. Relief too raw and too fragile for celebration. Bo's shoulders dropped an inch. Rhea set her phone down and pressed her fingers against her eyes. Marcus nodded once, a slow, deep inclination of his head that carried the gravity of a man who had just watched his home pulled back from the edge of an abyss. That's the property title, Rhea said. What about the financial records? The fraud accusation? Dane looked at Evan. How far are you? Evan straightened. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, his hands stained with red and blue ink. But his voice was steady. I've matched every bank statement from 2015 through 2023 with the spreadsheet entries. There are 9 discrepancies, all minor, all explainable. Data entry errors, transposed numbers, 1 duplicated entry from 2017. Nothing that indicates fraud. Nothing that even suggests fraud. Will it hold up in a hearing? I'm 17 and I dropped out of school. I don't know what holds up in a hearing. Judith will make it hold up, Rhea said. If the data is clean, she'll make it sing. Saturday was preparation. Sunday was rehearsal. Judith Pace arrived at the clubhouse at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, a small woman in a gray suit carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived multiple wars, which, in a legal sense, it had. She spread documents across the bar, the pool table, and 3 folding tables that Marcus had brought from the storage room, and she walked through the case the way a general walks through a battle plan, methodically, ruthlessly, anticipating every angle of attack and preparing a counter for each one. They're going to come at us in 3 waves, she said. First, the property title. They'll argue the transfer was improperly recorded and that the club has no legal claim to the building. We counter with the state database copy of the 1987 resolution. Certified, notarized, irrefutable. Second, the financial records. They'll present their manufactured evidence of fraud, whatever Callaway's forensic accountants have cooked up. We counter with the reconstructed records, matched and verified line by line. She glanced at Evan. The boy did good work. I've reviewed it. It's clean. Third, and this is where it gets ugly, they'll attack the club's character. They'll bring up criminal records, incident reports, noise complaints, anything they can find to paint Iron Haven as a nuisance and a threat to the community. This is where the neighborhood statements matter. 23 residents testifying to the club's value is worth more than any financial document. She paused. Her eyes moved across the room, cataloging faces, measuring resolve. But none of that is our strongest weapon, she said. Our strongest weapon is sitting in the storage room. Nadia and Evan. Their testimony. The coercion. The manufactured custody crisis. The exploitation of a minor. That's not just a defense. That's a counterattack. If we present it correctly, we don't just defeat the property challenge. We expose Callaway's entire operation. He'll deny it, Bo said. Of course he'll deny it. But Cole has the metadata from the photographs. He has the timeline of Nadia's custody case. He has the employment records showing Victor Kern on Ridgeline's payroll. And he has the virus architecture, the custom-built code that proves someone with insider knowledge designed the attack. Callaway can deny all he wants. The evidence doesn't lie. People lie about evidence all the time, Dane said. That's what lawyers are for. Judith looked at him. Her eyes were dark, sharp, carrying the particular fire of a woman who had spent her career fighting for people the system had abandoned and who had never, not once, accepted that the system's failures were inevitable. Not this time, she said. Sunday night. The clubhouse was quiet for the first time in 5 days. The documents were organized, the statements were compiled, the case was prepared. Judith had gone home to sleep. The members had dispersed to their own apartments and houses, under strict instructions to be at the county building by 8 a.m. Dane sat alone at the bar. The clubhouse was dark except for the neon beer sign in the window, a relic from the days when the bar still served, casting a red and blue glow across the room. His coffee was cold. His hands were flat on the scarred wood. Mara appeared at 9:30. She came through the front door without knocking, the way she always did, and crossed the room to the bar and sat on the stool next to Dane. "You should be home," he said. "Pauline's working the night shift." "That doesn't mean you should be here." "That's exactly what it means." They sat in silence. The neon sign buzzed. A train passed on the tracks behind the building, its horn long and low, shaking the windows. "Are you scared?" Mara asked. Dane looked at her. In the red and blue light, her face was half in shadow, her gray eyes luminous, carrying a depth of perception that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the particular education that comes from being failed by every institution designed to protect you. "Yes," he said. It was the first time she had heard him admit fear. The word hung in the air between them, small, honest, devastating in its simplicity. "Not of losing the building," he continued. "Buildings can be replaced. I'm scared of what happens to the people if we lose. Evan goes back to Calloway's leverage. Nadia loses Elena again. Cole, Bo, Rhea, Marcus, Ray, Tommy, they've all built something here, something that matters, something that's the only good thing some of them have." He paused. "Something that's the only good thing I have." Mara didn't offer comfort. She didn't say it would be okay. She had spent her entire life being told things would be okay by people who had no power to make them so, and she had learned that false reassurance is its own kind of cruelty. Instead, she said, "Then don't lose." Dane looked at her for a long time. The neon hummed. The train's horn faded into the distance. The coffee sat cold between his scarred hands. "No," he said, "I don't plan to." Monday morning, 7:45. The sky was gray and low, the temperature 12 degrees, the wind cutting down the streets like a blade. The county administrative building sat on Main Street between the post office and the library, a squat, brick structure with columns that were meant to convey authority and instead conveyed the institutional exhaustion of a municipality that hadn't had a budget surplus in 15 years. They arrived in formation. 3 Harleys first, Dane, Bo, Marcus. Engines rolling low, exhaust trailing white in the frozen air. Behind them, Ray's truck with Judith in the passenger seat and a box of documents in the bed. Behind that, Tommy's car, with Nadia and Elena in the back seat. Rhea riding shotgun. And behind that, in a car that Dorothy Vance had driven from her retirement condo 40 minutes away, Evan Rourke, wearing a button-down shirt that Tommy had loaned him, his hair combed for the first time in days, his face carrying the green-white pallor of someone about to do the hardest thing he had ever done. They parked in a row along the curb. They dismounted, gathered, and stood on the sidewalk in front of the building. Leather and suits and borrowed shirts, and one small gray-eyed girl in an oversized coat, looking up at the columns and the double doors and the weight of what waited inside. Cole arrived last. He pulled up in Dane's truck, unshaved, exhausted, carrying a laptop bag over his shoulder and a manila envelope in his hand. He walked straight to Dane and handed him the envelope. "Certified copy," Cole said. "State seal. Original resolution number. Complete chain of title from 1987 to present. Irrefutable." Dane took the envelope, held it, felt its weight, physical and otherwise. "Let's go," he said. The hearing room was on the second floor, wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the hearing officer would sit. The room smelled like floor wax and forced heat, and the particular institutional staleness of a space that existed for the resolution of disputes that most people would never know about. Calloway was already there. He sat at the right-hand table with dice beside him, and 2 other men in suits who had the polished, impersonal look of attorneys who charged by the quarter hour. His overcoat was draped over his chair. His hands were folded on the table. His expression was serene, the manufactured calm of a man who believed he had already won and was simply waiting for the formalities to confirm it. He looked up when they entered. His eyes moved across the group. Dane, Bo, Marcus, Rhea, Cole, Ray, Tommy, Judith, Nadia, Elena, Evan, Dorothy. And something shifted in his expression. Not alarm. Recalibration. The slight narrowing of the eyes, the fractional tightening of the jaw. The involuntary adjustments of a predator who has just noticed that the prey is not behaving as expected. His eyes stopped on Evan, then moved to Nadia, then to Elena. And for the first time, Ren Calloway's composure cracked. It was small, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. A flicker in the eyes, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second. The look of a man who has just realized that the weapon he built has been turned around and is now pointed at his chest. Dice saw it too. He leaned toward Calloway and whispered something. Calloway's jaw tightened. He straightened in his chair, smoothed his tie, and restored the mask. But Mara had seen the crack, and she knew, with the certainty of a girl who had spent her entire life watching adults' faces, for the microsignals that predicted whether the next moment would be safe or dangerous, that Ren Calloway, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, was afraid. Dane took his seat at the left-hand table, Judith beside him. The others filled the chairs behind them, a wall of leather and scars and borrowed shirts and quiet, unyielding resolve. The hearing officer entered, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and a file folder and the weary authority of someone who had presided over 1,000 disputes and expected this one to be no different. This hearing is called to address the property challenge filed by Ridgeline Development Partners against the Ironhaven Motorcycle Club regarding the parcel at 1140 Weller Avenue, she said. Mr. Calloway, you may present your case. Calloway stood. He buttoned his jacket. He smiled. And across the aisle, Dane Mercer sat with his scarred hands flat on the table, his eyes forward, his breathing steady, and waited for the moment, the precise, irreversible moment, when everything Calloway had built would begin to collapse, one lie at a time, in a room full of people who had nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. Calloway spoke for 22 minutes. He was good. Mara had to give him that. Not respect, not admiration, but the cold acknowledgement that a predator who has survived this long in the world has survived because he knows how to perform. His voice was measured, reasonable, carrying the warm baritone of a man who believed his own narrative so thoroughly that the performance and the person had become indistinguishable. He presented charts, he cited zoning regulations, he referenced property transfer protocols with the fluency of someone who had memorized the language of bureaucracy the way a con artist memorizes accents, not to communicate, but to camouflage. His argument was simple and elegant. The original 1987 property transfer from the county to Ironhaven Motorcycle Club had never been properly recorded. The local registry showed no certified copy. The chain of title was broken. Therefore, the club's claim to 1140 Weller Avenue was legally void, and the property should revert to county control. At which point, Ridgeline Development Partners, having already filed the appropriate applications, would acquire it through standard commercial channels. He never raised his voice. He never gestured broadly. He stood at the table with his hands resting lightly on the surface and delivered his case with the quiet confidence of a man placing a bet on a game he had already fixed. When he finished, he sat down. Dice passed him a glass of water. He drank without looking at anyone. The hearing officer turned to the left-hand table. Ms. Pace? Judith stood. She was 6 inches shorter than Calloway, 30 years less expensive in her wardrobe, and approximately 100 times more dangerous. She didn't have charts. She didn't have visual aids. She had a manila envelope, a box of documents, and the particular ferocity of a woman who had spent her career in rooms like this, fighting for people who couldn't afford the kind of lawyers who charged by the quarter hour. Mr. Calloway's case rests on a single premise, Judith said, that the original 1987 transfer documents don't exist. He's counting on the fact that the county's physical copy was destroyed in a records room flood in 1993. He's counting on the fact that the club's digital copies were recently destroyed by a targeted cyber attack. What he's not counting on, she opened the manila envelope and withdrew a document, is the State Archive database. She placed the document on the hearing officer's table. This is a certified copy of Resolution 87-1142, authorizing the transfer of the former Weller manufacturing property to the Ironhaven Motorcycle Club, dated September 14, 1987. It was retrieved from the state's historical property archive by our technical specialist 48 hours ago. It is complete, notarized, bearing the original county seal, and entered into the state system during the 2002 digitization initiative. The hearing officer picked up the document, adjusted her glasses. Read. Calloway didn't move, but Dice shifted in his chair, a small, involuntary adjustment that broadcast discomfort the way a radio broadcasts static. The chain of title is intact, Judith continued. From the county resolution through the current day, Iron Haven Motorcycle Club has maintained continuous documented ownership of the property at 1140 Weller Avenue. The premise of Mr. Calloway's challenge is factually incorrect. She let that settle. Then she turned to the box. But the question of property title is only part of this story. The more significant question is why Mr. Calloway believed the club's records would be unavailable. And the answer to that question reveals a pattern of conduct that this hearing officer should be made aware of. Calloway's attorney, the more senior of the two, a man with silver temples and the practiced blankness of someone who had defended worse, leaned forward. Objection. This hearing is limited to the property challenge. Ms. Pace is introducing extraneous matters. The matters are directly relevant to the challenge, Judith said. Mr. Calloway's filing was timed to coincide with the destruction of the club's records, a destruction that was orchestrated by Mr. Calloway himself through the coercion of two individuals. If this hearing is about whether Iron Haven has a right to its property, then the attempt to manufacture a fraudulent basis for seizure is not extraneous. It's the heart of the matter. The hearing officer looked at Calloway's attorney, then at Judith. I'll allow it. Proceed, Ms. Pace. Judith called Evan first. He walked to the front of the room on legs that were visibly unsteady, his borrowed button-down shirt too large at the collar, his hands clenched at his sides. He sat in the witness chair and looked out at the room, at Calloway, who watched him with an expression of polished indifference, at Dane, who gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod, at Mara, who sat in the second row with her hands in the pockets of her Goodwill coat and her gray eyes fixed on his face with the steady, unwavering attention of someone who understood exactly what it cost to sit in that chair. State your name, Judith said. Evan Rourke. His voice cracked on the surname. He cleared his throat. Evan Rourke. Mr. Rourke, how old are you? 17. Do you know the man seated at the table to your right? Mr. Wren Calloway. Evan's eyes moved to Calloway. The fear was there, visible, undeniable, a living thing that moved behind his face like an animal behind glass. But beneath the fear, something else was emerging. Something that looked, to Mara, like the expression of a person who has been drowning and has just felt their feet touch bottom. Yes, Evan said. He's the one who told me to do it. He told the story. All of it. The hospice, the bills, the younger brothers, the USB drive, the window, the 5 minutes that destroyed 20 years of records. His voice broke twice, once when he described Tyler and Sam, and once when he described the moment he collided with Mara in the clubhouse doorway, and saw the look in her eyes, and understood that what he was doing would hurt people who had never hurt anyone. Calloway's attorney cross-examined. He was surgical, precise, designed to create doubt without appearing cruel. A difficult balance when the witness was 17 and visibly shaking. He questioned Evan's credibility, his motives, his understanding of the technology involved. Evan answered each question with the halting, imperfect honesty of someone who had nothing left to hide and no skill at hiding it. When Evan stepped down, Judith called Nadia. Nadia Kern walked to the front of the room the way she had once walked through forward operating bases. Straight-backed, eyes forward, each step placed with the precision of someone navigating terrain that could detonate beneath her feet. She wore civilian clothes but carried herself in uniform. Her face was composed, controlled, locked behind the armor of decades of military discipline. She sat. She stated her name. And then she told the room about Elena. She told them about the custody battle, the judge who had looked at her psych evaluation and decided that a woman who had served 3 deployments and survived things that most people couldn't imagine was too damaged to raise her own child. She told them about Victor's disappearance with Elena, the empty apartment, the disconnected phone, the school that had no forwarding address. She told them about the 4 months of searching, the legal dead ends, the night she spent staring at the ceiling of her apartment on Ridgefield Street, wondering if her daughter was alive. And she told them about Calloway, the photographs on his phone, the leverage, the flash drive, the promise that cooperation would bring Elena home. The silence afterward, the days and weeks of waiting for a call that never came, while the data she had stolen was being weaponized against the only family she had left, besides the daughter she couldn't find. He manufactured the crisis, Nadia said. Her voice was steady, factual, carrying the weight of testimony delivered under oath in conditions that demanded absolute precision. My ex-husband didn't run. He was relocated by Ridgeline. He's been on their payroll for 2 years. The disappearance of my daughter was not a custody dispute. It was a corporate operation designed to create leverage against me so that I would compromise the security of Iron Haven Motorcycle Club. Calloway's attorney objected. The hearing officer overruled. Judith presented the metadata from the photographs, geotagged, time-stamped, traceable to a phone number registered to a shell company that shared a mailing address with Ridgeline Development Partners. She presented Victor Kern's employment records, obtained through a public records request that Cole had filed from a rest stop on his drive to the state archive. She presented the virus architecture analysis, Cole's detailed breakdown of the custom-built malware, its targeting patterns, its dependence on insider knowledge of Iron Haven's file structure. Document by document, testimony by testimony, the case against Calloway accumulated like snow on a rooftop. Each piece light on its own, devastating in aggregate. Calloway's senior attorney requested a recess. The hearing officer granted 15 minutes. In the hallway, Calloway cornered Dice near the water fountain. Mara was sitting on a bench 12 feet away, her textbook open on her lap. Invisible, as always, in the way that children are invisible when adults are panicking. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. Calloway's hands were moving, sharp, controlled gestures that cut the air like blades. Dice was nodding, his face gray, his portfolio clutched against his chest like a shield. The senior attorney stood apart, arms crossed, his expression carrying the careful neutrality of a man calculating whether his client had become a liability. Dane stood at the end of the hallway with Bo. Neither of them spoke. They watched Calloway the way sentries watch a perimeter, not with aggression, but with the patient, unflinching attention of men who have learned that the most dangerous moment in any conflict is the moment the enemy realizes they've lost. The recess ended. They returned to the hearing room. Calloway's attorney stood. Mr. Calloway wishes to address the hearing officer directly. Judith glanced at Dane. Dane's expression didn't change. Calloway stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at the hearing officer with the same serene expression he had worn at the beginning. The mask restored, the performance resuming, the predator recomposing itself. These allegations are extraordinary, Calloway said, and extraordinarily unfounded. A teenager with a criminal motive and a disgruntled club member with a custody grievance have concocted a narrative designed to distract from the legitimate legal questions at issue. Ridgeline Development Partners is a registered corporation with a spotless record. We have no connection to any cyber attack, any custody manipulation, or any of the sensational claims presented by Ms. Pace. He paused, adjusted his cuffs. We withdraw the property challenge, not because these allegations have merit, but because the cost of litigating against this kind of theatrics exceeds the value of the property in question. Iron Haven can keep its clubhouse. He sat down. The room was silent. Judith didn't move. She stood at her table, one hand resting on the box of documents, her eyes fixed on Calloway with the focused intensity of a woman who had been doing this long enough to recognize a tactical retreat when she saw one. The property challenge is withdrawn, Judith said to the hearing officer. But the evidence of coercion, fraud, and conspiracy presented today constitutes grounds for referral to the county prosecutor's office. We formally request that this hearing officer recommend a criminal investigation into Ridgeline Development Partners and its principals. Calloway's attorney was on his feet. That's beyond the scope of this hearing. The scope of this hearing includes any matter arising from the challenged filing, Judith said. The filing was the product of a criminal conspiracy. The hearing officer has discretionary authority to refer. The hearing officer removed her glasses, set them on the table, looked at Calloway. A long, measured look that carried the accumulated weight of a career spent adjudicating disputes between people with power and people without it. and the particular weariness of someone who had seen too many of those disputes resolved in favor of the former. The property challenge filed by Ridgeline Development Partners is dismissed with prejudice, she said. The evidence presented today raises serious concerns regarding potential criminal conduct. I will be forwarding the complete record of this hearing to the county prosecutor's office with a recommendation for investigation. She gathered her files, stood, left the room through a side door. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Bo exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath that sounded like it had been held for a week, and put one hand on Dane's shoulder. Marcus closed his eyes and lowered his head. Ray rubbed his face with both hands and made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Tommy leaned against the wall and stared at the ceiling and said nothing, his jaw working, his eyes bright. Rhea turned to Nadia. Nadia was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face carrying an expression that Mara would remember for years. Not triumph, not relief, but the stunned, disbelieving stillness of a person who has been bracing for impact and has just felt the vehicle stop inches from the wall. Elena reached over and took her mother's hand. Nadia looked down at their interlocked fingers, and then, finally, publicly, without shame or restraint, she cried. Not the silent, controlled tears of the storage room at 2 a.m, open, broken, unbeautiful crying, the kind that contorts the face and shakes the body and sounds like something being released from a cage where it has been held for so long that it has forgotten the shape of freedom. Evan sat in the back row, alone, his borrowed shirt damp with sweat, his hands trembling in his lap. He watched the room around him, the bikers embracing, the lawyer packing her briefcase with the satisfied efficiency of a surgeon closing a successful operation, the mother and daughter holding hands in the front row, and his face carried the particular devastation of someone who knows they were part of the destruction and is not yet sure they deserve to be part of the rebuilding. Mara walked to him. She sat in the empty chair beside his. She didn't speak. She just sat there, small and quiet and present, the way Bo had sat with her on her first day at Iron Haven, not filling the silence but sharing it. After a while, Evan said, "I don't know what happens now." "Nobody does," Mara said. "That's kind of the point." Calloway left the building through a side exit. Mara saw him through the window, walking fast across the parking lot, Dice half running to keep up, the senior attorney already on his phone. Calloway's overcoat flapped in the wind. His stride had changed. The serene, predatory glide replaced by something tighter, faster, the gait of a man who was not retreating but recalculating, and who understood that the ground beneath him had shifted in ways that could not be reversed by charm or money or the careful manipulation of vulnerable people. He got into a black sedan. The engine started. The car pulled out of the lot and turned north on Main Street and disappeared. Mara watched until the car was gone. Then she turned away from the window and walked back to the people who remained. They went home to the clubhouse. Not directly. They stopped first at the Fractured Cup Diner, all of them, filling 3 booths and 4 counter stools, ordering coffee and eggs and toast with the particular hunger of people who have just survived something and need the simple, animal confirmation of food and warmth and the presence of others. The woman behind the counter, the same one from that first night, red hair, cigarette behind the ear, watched them file in with an expression that had migrated from practiced indifference to something closer to curiosity. "Big group," she said. "Big morning," Bo replied. They ate. They didn't talk much. The food was mediocre. Eggs too dry, toast too pale, coffee too thin. But it tasted extraordinary because they were eating it together, in a cracked vinyl booth in a diner on Marshall Road, alive and intact and still in possession of the only home most of them had. Dane sat at the counter. He ate scrambled eggs and drank 2 cups of coffee and watched the room in the mirror behind the counter, the reflection of his people, scattered across the diner like survivors of a shipwreck washed up on the same shore. His face carried the deep, bone-level exhaustion of a man who has been running on adrenaline and duty for days, and has just felt both of them begin to drain from his body like water from a cracked vessel. Mara sat beside him. She ate toast with butter and drank hot chocolate that tasted like powder mixed with warm water, which is exactly what it was. "Dane. What happens to Calloway?" Dane set his coffee down. "The prosecutor will investigate. It'll take time." Months, probably. Maybe longer. Men like Calloway don't go down easy. They have lawyers, accounts in other states, people who owe them favors. He might walk. He might not. That doesn't seem fair. It's not. But it's not our fight anymore. We did what we could. The rest belongs to the system. The system isn't very good at this. Dane looked at her, and for the first time in the week she had known him, really known him, not as the club president, but as the man behind the patches and the scars. He smiled, a real smile. Small, tired, creased with lines that had been carved by years of holding everything together, but real, genuine. The smile of a man who has just heard an 11-year-old articulate the central lesson of his entire adult life in 6 words. No, he said, it's not. That's why we exist. They went home. The clubhouse on Weller Avenue looked the same from the outside. Cinder block painted black, barred windows, the hand-welded sign above the door. The Harleys parked in a row under the overhang, chrome dull under the gray winter sky. But inside things had shifted, not dramatically, not the way things shift in movies, with sudden transformations and swelling music and the visible, instantaneous repair of everything that was broken. The shift was subtler, quieter. The kind of change that happens in the spaces between moments, in the way people move around each other, in the weight of the silences that fill a room. Cole came home Friday of the following week. He had stayed at the county administrative building for 2 extra days, filing additional copies of every document, creating redundancies that would ensure no single act of sabotage could erase Iron Haven's history again. When he walked through the clubhouse door, he went straight to his office, sat down at his computer, and began building a new security system. Backups on backups, encrypted drives stored off-site, a digital fortress around the club's records that would have made a government agency envious. He didn't say much about the trip. He never said much about anything. But he left his office door open now, all the way open, not half open. And when Mara sat in her corner chair doing homework, she could see him working and he could see her reading, and the mutual visibility was its own kind of communication. Nadia's situation took longer. Dane was true to his word. He had the conversation with her about trust and what it cost to break it. The conversation happened in the back office, behind closed doors, and lasted 2 hours. Nobody heard what was said. When they emerged, Nadia's eyes were red, and Dane's face was set in the particular expression of a man who has delivered a difficult judgment and is living with the weight of it. Nadia's membership was suspended for 6 months. She could enter the clubhouse, attend events, participate in community programs. But her cut, the leather vest with the patches she had earned over 7 years, hung on the hook by the door, unworn, a visible marker of a breach that would take time to repair. She accepted the decision without protest. She came to the clubhouse every day, worked on the reconstruction of the records she had helped destroy, and sat with Elena in the main room while the girl did homework at the bar, and slowly, cautiously, began to trust that the mother who had been declared dead was alive and present and not going to disappear again. Elena was quiet. She carried the particular wariness of a teenager who had been lied to by the adults responsible for her safety, and who was not yet ready to believe that any adult could be trusted. She watched the bikers with the guarded curiosity of an animal assessing a new environment, alert, ready to bolt, but drawn to the warmth despite herself. Bo brought her a hot chocolate every afternoon without being asked. Rhea checked her blood pressure once and her temperature twice, the clinical assessment serving as a cover for the kind of attentive, non-intrusive care that a girl who had been neglected needed more than medicine. Marcus fixed the loose leg on her chair one afternoon, getting down on the floor with a wrench and a piece of scrap wood. And when he finished, he looked up at her and said, "That'll hold?" And Elena almost smiled. Almost. Not quite. But the muscles were remembering. Evan's situation was the one that Dane thought about the longest. The boy had committed a crime, breaking and entering, destruction of property, computer fraud. The legal consequences could be severe. The moral consequences were already being paid in the currency of guilt that Evan carried on his face like a visible wound, a constant low-grade devastation that colored everything he did. 2 weeks after the hearing, Dane drove to the hospice where Evan's grandfather lived. He went alone. He sat with Roy Rourke for an hour, a 91-year-old man in a hospital bed, body failing, mind sharp, eyes carrying the particular clarity of someone who knows they are near the end and has decided to spend their remaining time seeing things as they actually are. "Your grandson made a mistake," Dane said. "My grandson was desperate," Roy said. His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a man whose lungs were slowly forgetting their purpose. "Desperation isn't a mistake. It's a condition. You treat conditions. You don't punish them." Dane offered Evan a job at the clubhouse. Not a membership, that would come later if it came at all, and it would be earned in the way everything at Iron Haven was earned, through time and presence and the slow accumulation of trust. But a job. Managing the cafe that Rhea had been talking about opening in the front room, a real cafe with a real espresso machine and pastries from the bakery on 4th Street, a place where the neighborhood could come and sit and drink something that wasn't vending machine coffee from a diner with a cracked cup on its sign. Evan said yes. He said it quickly, the way people say yes when they've been waiting for someone to offer them a reason to stay. The cafe opened on a Saturday in March. Bo built the counter from reclaimed wood that Marcus salvaged from a demolished barn outside of town. Tommy painted the walls, a warm, deep gray that Rhea chose because she said it made the room feel like the inside of a wool coat. Cole installed the Wi-Fi and set up a charging station by the window. Ray stocked the pastry case with muffins and scones from the bakery and a handwritten sign that said, "All proceeds support Iron Haven community programs." Evan worked the espresso machine with the focused intensity of a 17-year-old who had been given a second chance and was determined to deserve it. He was good at it. Quick, precise, remembering orders, remembering names. Tyler and Sam came after school and sat at the corner table doing homework. And when customers asked Evan who the kids were, he said, "My brothers," with a simplicity and a pride that made Mara's chest ache. The cafe changed the clubhouse, not the bones of it. The cinder block walls were still there, the barred windows, the worn leather cuts hanging on their hooks. But the atmosphere shifted. The coffee was real now, not the burnt institutional brew from the salvaged commercial maker, but actual espresso, made by someone who cared about the temperature of the milk and the timing of the extraction. Neighbors came. Not the ones who had always come, the ones who already knew that Iron Haven was not what it looked like from the outside, but new ones. Tentative, curious, drawn by the smell of fresh coffee and the sight of a hand-painted sign in the window of a building they had avoided for years. They came and they sat, and they drank their coffee, and they looked around at the scarred furniture and the patched cuts and the massive tattooed men who moved through the room with a gentleness that contradicted everything the outside of the building promised. And some of them came back, and some of those brought friends. And slowly, in the way that all real things happen, not with fanfare, but with repetition, not with transformation, but with accumulation, the boundary between Iron Haven and the neighborhood began to dissolve. Mara kept her corner. The battered armchair with the reading lamp, the spot that everyone called hers, though nobody had ever officially given it to her. She came every Tuesday after school, sometimes Thursdays. She did homework, she read. She watched the cafe fill with people and listened to the espresso machine hiss and the conversations overlap and the laughter that came from the table where Tyler and Sam argued over math problems, while Evan wiped the counter and pretended not to smile. On a Tuesday in April, she was sitting in her chair with a library book open on her lap when Dane sat down across from her on the arm of the couch. He had a cup of espresso, a small one, the way he always drank it, and his boots were scuffed from the garage and there was a grease stain on his left hand that he hadn't noticed. "How's the book?" he asked. "Good." "What's it about?" "A girl who solves a mystery." "Any good at it?" "She's okay. She misses things sometimes." Dane nodded. He drank his espresso. The cafe hummed around them, the machine, the conversations, the clink of cups. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the Harleys in the parking lot and turned the chrome into a row of lights. "Thank you," Dane said. Mara looked up from her book. "For what?" "For the napkin. For seeing what nobody else saw. For being here." Mara considered this. She closed the book, leaving her finger between the pages to hold her place. "You would have found him eventually," she said. "Evan, the virus, Calloway, you would have figured it out." "Maybe, but not in time." She looked at him, at the scar through his eyebrow, at the silver at his temples, at the tattoo on his wrist that said, "Still here." and she felt something she had not felt since before the water heater, before the courthouse, before the post-it notes, and the frozen dinners, and the long chain of rooms where no one came when she screamed. She felt home. Not the word, not the concept. The thing itself, the warm, physical, irreducible reality of a place where she was known and seen and valued, not for what she could do, but for who she was. A room with coffee and leather and engine noise, and the presence of people who had been broken by the world and had chosen to protect each other instead of breaking anyone else. "I'm not going anywhere," Mara said. Dane looked at her. His eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, carrying the weight of 3 wars and a lifetime of damage, and the particular hard-won gentleness of a man who had learned that strength without kindness is just another kind of violence, held hers for a long moment. "I know," he said. Outside, a Harley started. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. A deep, rolling thunder that shook the windows and rattled the cups on the counter and sent a vibration through the floor that Mara felt in the soles of her sneakers. Then another engine, then a third. The sound built and merged and became a single voice, rough, powerful, unmistakable, that rolled down Weller Avenue and out into the afternoon and carried with it the only message that Iron Haven had ever needed to send. "We are still here." And in her corner, in her chair, with her book on her lap, and the coffee steam rising and the sound of engines fading into the distance like a promise that would be kept, Mara Quinn turned the page and kept reading.